The CEO was on his doorstep at 7:13 a.m., holding his daughter's stuffed rabbit, and Ethan Parker's entire world tilted on its axis. Lydia Shaw didn't do house calls. She didn't show up unannounced, and she definitely didn't look at him with eyes that soft, that uncertain, that devastatingly human. 24 hours ago, she'd been the iron-willed executive who could silence a boardroom with a glance. Now she stood in his doorway like a woman who'd stumbled into something she couldn't control. Whatever had started at last night's company party hadn't ended when she drove away. It had followed her home and brought her back. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this journey travels. The coffee had gone cold in Ethan's hand. He stood there, one arm braced against the doorframe, staring at the impossible sight before him. Lydia Shaw. Lydia Shaw. In weekend clothes he'd never imagined she owned, dark jeans that actually fit like a human being wore them, a cream-colored sweater that softened the razor edges he'd only ever seen draped in tailored suits, and no makeup, or at least far less than the armor she wore to the office, but it was the stuffed rabbit that broke his brain. Mr. Hopscotch dangled from her right hand, his floppy gray ears catching the early morning light, one button eye slightly askew from years of fierce six-year-old love. The same Mr. Hopscotch that had caused a meltdown of epic proportions at 10:47 p.m. the night before. The same Mr. Hopscotch that Ethan had frantically searched for until midnight, tearing apart his car, retracing their steps from the company party, calling the venue 3 times until a very annoyed custodian had promised to look. "I found him in the conference room," Lydia said, and her voice was different too. Quieter, almost uncertain. Under the table where we were sitting, Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You drove here," he finally managed, "at 7 in the morning, on a Saturday." "I did." "To return a stuffed rabbit." "Yes." The word hung between them, and Ethan saw something flicker across Lydia's face, something that looked almost like nervousness, which was impossible because Lydia Shaw had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without breaking a sweat. She'd fired senior executives with the efficiency of someone deleting spam emails. She'd rebuilt an entire division in 3 months and made it profitable in 6. She didn't get nervous about returning lost toys. "May I come in?" she asked, and there it was again, that unfamiliar softness in her voice. "I know it's early. I should have texted first. I just thought—" "Daddy?" Both of them turned toward the small voice. Maisie stood at the end of the hallway in her unicorn pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes with one small fist. Her dark curls, so much like her mother's, though Ethan tried not to think about that most days, formed a wild halo around her face. "Baby, I thought you were asleep." "I heard talking." Maisie took 3 steps forward, then froze as she spotted the figure in the doorway. Her eyes went wide, then wider, then impossibly wide as she saw what Lydia was holding. "Mr. Hopscotch!" The scream of pure joy could have shattered glass. Maisie launched herself down the hallway with the single-minded determination of a heat-seeking missile, and Ethan barely had time to step aside before his daughter was wrapping herself around Lydia's legs. "You found him! You found him!" And Daddy looked everywhere and couldn't find him, and I thought he was gone forever, and I was so sad and— "Maisie, breath," Ethan said, reaching for his daughter. "Let Ms. Shaw—" "Lydia," she said quietly, and Ethan's hand froze mid-reach. "She can call me Lydia." She crouched down, bringing herself to Maisie's eye level with a grace that seemed at odds with the rigid executive Ethan had worked under for 3 years. Up close, he could see the faint shadows under her eyes. Had she slept at all? And the way her fingers trembled slightly as she held out the rabbit. "He was very brave," Lydia told Maisie with complete seriousness. "He stayed right where you left him, waiting to be found. That's what the best friends do." Maisie grabbed Mr. Hopscotch and hugged him so fiercely that Ethan worried about the remaining button eye. "Thank you, Lydia," she whispered, and then with the impulsive affection that only 6-year-olds possess, she threw her arms around Lydia's neck. Ethan watched his boss, his CEO, the woman who'd once made a senior analyst cry during a presentation, freeze completely. Her arms hovered in the air for a long moment, as if she'd forgotten how hugs worked. Then slowly, almost experimentally, she wrapped them around Maisie's small frame and held on. When she looked up at Ethan over his daughter's shoulder, her eyes were wet. "I should go," Lydia said, but she didn't move. "I just wanted to make sure she got him back." "You should stay for breakfast," Maisie announced, pulling back to look at Lydia with the confidence of someone who'd never learned that adults didn't always do what you wanted. "Daddy makes really good pancakes on Saturdays. He puts chocolate chips in them, even though we're not supposed to have chocolate for breakfast. But he says sometimes breaking rules is okay if it makes people happy." "Maisie, I'd love to," Lydia said. Ethan stared at her. "You don't have to." "I know." But Lydia stood, and for a moment she was the CEO again, making a decision with absolute certainty. Then she smiled, really smiled, not the professional curve of lips she deployed in meetings, and the CEO disappeared. "But I'd like to, if that's okay." It wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. This was Lydia Shaw, the woman who controlled every aspect of his professional life, standing in his doorway asking to have breakfast with his daughter. This violated at least 17 unspoken rules about work-life boundaries, and probably several spoken ones he couldn't remember because his brain had apparently stopped functioning. "Okay," Ethan heard himself say. "Yeah, okay." Maisie cheered and grabbed Lydia's hand, tugging her inside with the unselfconscious enthusiasm she brought to everything. Ethan stepped back, letting them pass, and caught a scent of something light and floral. So different from the sharp, expensive perfume Lydia wore to the office, that made his chest tighten in ways he absolutely could not examine right now. The door clicked shut behind her, and Ethan had the sudden, irrational feeling that something had just changed. Something bigger than an unexpected breakfast guest. Something that would matter in ways he couldn't yet understand. 20 minutes later, Ethan stood at his stove, whisking pancake batter with more force than strictly necessary, while his brain continued its futile attempt to process the current situation. Lydia Shaw was in his kitchen. Not his office kitchen, where she occasionally swept through to refill her coffee without acknowledging anyone's existence. Not the break room at work, where he'd once seen her microwave what appeared to be the saddest desk salad in human history. His kitchen. The one with the chipped tile backsplash he kept meaning to fix. The one with Maisie's artwork magneted to the refrigerator in layers so thick they'd probably achieved some kind of critical mass. The one with the grocery list on the counter that currently read cheese, the good kind, not the sad kind, written in his daughter's enthusiastic scrawl. And she was sitting at his breakfast table, his wobbly breakfast table that he really needed to fix, the one he'd bought for $40 at a yard sale 3 years ago. Talking to his daughter like this was completely normal. And then the unicorn told the dragon that they should be friends instead of fighting, Maisie was explaining, gesturing wildly with Mr. Hopscotch, because fighting is what boring people do, and they were both too special to be boring. "That's very wise," Lydia said, and she sounded like she meant it. "I wish more people understood that." "Do you have a stuffed animal?" The question hung in the air. Ethan glanced over his shoulder to see Lydia's expression shift, something flickering across her face too quickly for him to identify. "I did," she said finally. "A long time ago. A bear named Winston." "What happened to him?" "I grew up." The words were simple, but something in Lydia's tone made Ethan's hands still on the whisk. He'd heard that tone before in his own voice when people asked about Maisie's mother. That careful neutrality that was really just pain with a professional veneer. "That's sad," Maisie announced with characteristic directness. "Daddy says I don't have to stop loving things just because I get bigger. He says the best things grow with you." Ethan cleared his throat. "Pancakes are almost ready." "Chocolate chip?" Maisie asked hopefully. "Is there any other kind on Saturday?" Maisie turned to Lydia with the satisfaction of someone whose worldview has been validated. "See? Daddy gets it." Lydia's laugh was soft, almost surprised, like she hadn't expected the sound to come out of her own mouth. "He does seem to." Ethan poured the first pancake onto the griddle, watching the batter bubble and spread. He should say something, make small talk, acknowledge the absolute strangeness of this situation. Instead, he found himself replaying last night, trying to figure out how they'd gotten from there to here. The company party had been mandatory, dressed up as optional in the invitation email that everyone understood meant, "Attendance will be noted." Ethan had almost skipped it anyway, had drafted the excuse email 3 times, but Maisie's grandmother had offered to babysit, and his coworker Jason had been relentless. "You never come to these things," Jason had argued over lunch that Friday. "People are starting to think you're either a robot or in witness protection." "I have a kid. I have 3, and a mortgage, and a drinking problem I'm pretty sure I'm developing from these quarterly reports. We all have excuses, Parker. Come have free alcohol and mediocre shrimp on the company dime." So he'd gone, planning to stay for exactly 1 hour and 43 minutes, long enough to be seen, short enough to avoid getting trapped in conversations about quarterly projections. He'd lasted 17 minutes before escaping to the conference room that had been set up as a quiet space, which was corporate event planning speak for where people go to check their phones and question their life choices. Lydia had been sitting alone at the conference table, staring at her phone with an expression that could have curdled milk. "Sorry," Ethan had said, already backing toward the door. "I didn't realize anyone was—" "Stay." She'd looked up, and something in her face had stopped him. "Please." It had been the please that did it. Lydia Shaw didn't say please. She gave directives, issued commands, made suggestions that everyone understood were actually orders. She didn't ask. He'd stayed. And somehow, 1 hour had turned into 3. The conference room had become its own small world, separate from the noise and forced cheerfulness of the party. They talked about everything except work, her childhood in boarding schools, his decision to take the job at her company after his wife left, Maisie's recent obsession with sea turtles, Lydia's admitted terror of anything that lived underwater. "Even goldfish?" he'd asked, amused despite himself. "Especially goldfish. They're constantly judging you with those dead eyes." He'd laughed, and she'd smiled, and for a moment she'd been just Lydia, not his boss, not the CEO, just a woman who was surprisingly funny when she wasn't crushing souls in boardrooms. Then Maisie's grandmother had called at 10:47 p.m., and his daughter's tearful voice had crackled through the speaker. "Daddy, I can't find Mr. Hopscotch anywhere, and I need him, and I can't sleep without him." Ethan had apologized and rushed out, but Lydia had followed him to his car, had helped him search the parking lot, had stood in the cold while he called the venue, and then had quietly said, "I'll check the conference room tomorrow, first thing. I promise." He'd thanked her and driven home, and that should have been the end of it, except she'd shown up at his door 7 hours later with a stuffed rabbit and eyes that looked like they'd seen something that mattered. "Daddy, you're burning the pancake." Ethan blinked back to the present. Smoke was rising from the griddle. He swore under his breath, then remembered his audience and bit back the creative follow-up he'd been planning. "Language," Maisie said primly, in perfect imitation of his own correction voice. "Sorry." He scraped the blackened pancake into the trash and poured fresh batter, forcing himself to focus. The new pancake hit the griddle with a satisfying sizzle. He added chocolate chips in what Maisie called the smile pattern. 2 for eyes, 1 for a nose, several for a goofy grin. "Can I help?" Lydia asked. Ethan turned to find her standing beside him, having crossed the kitchen so quietly he hadn't heard her approach. This close, he could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the slight wave in her dark hair that the aggressive straightening she did for work usually erased. She looked younger, softer, real in a way that made his throat tight. "You don't have to—" "I'd like to." She met his eyes. "I don't actually know how to make pancakes. I've had them, obviously, but I've never made them." The admission seemed to cost her something. Ethan glanced at Maisie, who was busy making Mr. Hopscotch dance across the table, then back at Lydia. "Okay," he said softly, "you're on chocolate chip duty." He handed her the bag, and their fingers brushed. The contact lasted maybe half a second, but Lydia pulled back like she'd been burned, clutching the chocolate chips with both hands. "Just drop them on the batter once it's poured," Ethan explained, pretending he hadn't noticed her reaction. "Maisie likes a lot, more than is probably nutritionally advisable." "I heard that," Maisie called. "You were supposed to." Lydia's smile was small and uncertain, but she moved closer to the stove, watching as Ethan flipped the pancake with a practiced motion. When he poured the next one, she carefully placed chocolate chips in what could generously be called a pattern, though it looked more like a chocolate chip had exploded in slow motion. "Perfect," Ethan said. It's a disaster. It's Maisie's dream pancake. She calls that pattern controlled chaos. She sounds like she'd make an excellent CEO. She's 6. I started learning boardroom strategy at 7. She's ahead of schedule. Ethan flipped the chaos pancake, catching Lydia's expression in his peripheral vision. She was watching the pancake like it held the secrets of the universe, her face so intent that something in his chest twisted sideways. "When's the last time you made breakfast?" he asked quietly. "I don't." She didn't look at him. "I have smoothies delivered. There's a service. Very efficient." "That sounds terrible." "It is." The admission was so soft he almost missed it. "It's absolutely terrible." They worked in silence after that, falling into an unexpected rhythm. Ethan poured, Lydia decorated, and the pile of pancakes grew. Some were perfect. Some were disasters. None of it mattered because Maisie cheered for each one like it was a work of art, and Lydia's smile got a little less uncertain with every chocolate chip she placed. When they finally sat down to eat, the table was crowded with pancakes, syrup, butter, and the orange juice Ethan had forgotten he'd purchased. Maisie had insisted on setting out the fancy plates, the ones with the chipped edges that had survived from the apartment before this one, and the result was chaotic and perfect in equal measure. "This is really good," Lydia said after her first bite, and she sounded genuinely surprised. "Daddy's the best cooker in the whole world," Maisie announced with her mouth full. "Chew, then talk." Maisie made an exaggerated chewing motion that was somehow both adorable and disgusting. Lydia laughed, really laughed, the kind that shook her shoulders and made her eyes crinkle at the corners, and Ethan felt something shift in his chest. This was dangerous. All of this. The ease of it, the warmth, the way Lydia looked sitting at his table like she belonged there. She was still his boss, still the woman who could fire him with a signature, still living in a world so far removed from his that they might as well be on different planets. But watching her teach Maisie how to make a syrup river, you have to build dams with the pancake pieces, see? Ethan couldn't quite remember why that mattered. "Do you have kids?" Maisie asked, because 6-year-olds had no filter, and even less sense of appropriate conversation boundaries. Lydia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "No." "Do you want kids?" "Maisie, it's okay," Lydia said, though her voice had gone quiet again. She set down her fork. "I don't know. I never really thought about it. My work has always been... it's been everything." "That sounds lonely," Maisie said with the casual brutality of childhood honesty. Ethan started to intervene, but Lydia spoke first. "It is," she said. "Sometimes it really is." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was weighted with things Ethan couldn't name. Maisie, blessedly, seemed to sense that the conversation had ventured into grown-up territory and pivoted with the grace of someone who'd never learned to be subtle. "Want to see my room? I have a rock collection, and Daddy says it's very impressive, even though some of them might just be dirt." "They're rocks," Ethan protested. "They're dirt that got ambitious," Maisie countered, and Lydia's laugh broke whatever tension had been building. "I'd love to see your rock collection," Lydia said. Maisie grabbed her hand and pulled her from the table, chattering about geological formations with the confidence of someone who'd watched exactly one nature documentary and considered herself an expert. Ethan watched them disappear down the hallway, then looked at the disaster of his kitchen, syrup pooling on the table, chocolate chips scattered across the counter, dirty dishes piled in the sink. It looked like life. Messy and imperfect, and absolutely nothing like the sterile efficiency he imagined Lydia's world contained. He started clearing plates, the familiar motions giving his hand something to do, while his brain continued its futile attempt to process the morning. This was fine. This was just breakfast. People had breakfast together all the time. The fact that one of those people was his CEO and the other was his daughter, and they were currently bonding over questionable rocks in a bedroom down the hall, was fine. Totally fine. Absolutely fine. He was loading the dishwasher when he heard Maisie's shriek of laughter, followed by Lydia's voice saying something he couldn't quite make out. More laughter. Then footsteps, and both of them appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Daddy, Lydia says there's a park nearby, and can we go? Please. Mr. Hopscotch needs fresh air, and I promised him we'd go on the swings today." Ethan looked at Lydia, who had the grace to appear slightly sheepish. I may have mentioned that the weather was nice. It's January. It's not raining. The bar for nice weather has really dropped. Please, Daddy? Maisie clasped her hands together in the prayer position she'd learned got her whatever she wanted approximately 60% of the time. Please, please, please. Ethan should say no, should make excuses about chores or errands or the 17 other things he needed to do with his Saturday. Should gently suggest that Lydia probably had better things to do than hang out with a 6-year-old at a neighborhood park. Let me finish the dishes, he said instead. Then we'll go. Maisie's cheer could have been heard in the next county. She launched herself at Ethan's legs, hugging him with the full-body enthusiasm that only small children could manage, then turned and did the same to Lydia. This time, Lydia was ready for it. Her arms came around Maisie immediately, and when she looked at Ethan over his daughter's head, her expression was so openly grateful, so genuinely happy, that he had to look away. He turned back to the dishes, listening to Maisie explain the complex social hierarchy of the park playground to Lydia with the seriousness of someone describing a corporate structure. Behind him, he heard Lydia ask questions, make appropriate impressed noises, and laugh in all the right places. The last plate clinked into the dishwasher. Ethan straightened, wiping his hands on a dish towel, and turned to find both of them watching him. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," they answered in unison, then looked at each other and dissolved into giggles. Ethan grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door, very carefully not thinking about how natural this felt, how easy, how much like something he could get used to if he wasn't careful. The park was a 15-minute walk through a neighborhood that had seen better days but was working its way back to respectable. Maisie walked between them, holding both their hands, swinging their arms and narrating their journey with the detailed enthusiasm of a nature documentary host. And here we see the Johnson house, which has the best Christmas decorations but also a mean cat named Professor Whiskers, who once stole my sandwich. A professor of sandwich theft, Lydia said solemnly. A dangerous adversary. The most dangerous. Daddy says we should respect him from a distance. Your father is a wise man. Ethan caught Lydia's eye over Maisie's head and found her smiling at him. Not the polite professional smile, but something real and warm that made his stomach flip in a way he absolutely could not analyze right now. They reached the park as the morning sun finally burned through the clouds. It wasn't fancy, just a few acres of grass, some playground equipment that had been installed sometime in the previous century, and a set of swings that squeaked ominously when the wind blew. But Maisie loved it with the fierce devotion she brought to everything she cared about, and watching her run toward the swings with Mr. Hopscotch tucked under her arm, Ethan felt the familiar ache of loving someone so much it physically hurt. She's remarkable, Lydia said softly beside him. She is. Ethan shoved his hands in his pockets. Takes after her mother in all the best ways. He hadn't meant to say that, hadn't mentioned Maisie's mother to anyone at work, had carefully constructed a professional persona that didn't include divorce or single parenthood or the complicated grief of loving someone who'd chosen to leave. But Lydia just nodded, her eyes on Maisie. And her father in the rest. Before Ethan could figure out how to respond to that, Maisie was shouting for them to come push her on the swings. They walked across the grass together, and Ethan tried not to notice how right it felt, walking beside Lydia Shaw in the morning sunlight, heading toward his daughter's laughter. He really, really tried. The next 3 hours disappeared in a blur of swings and slides, and a surprisingly competitive game of tic-tac-toe drawn in the dirt with sticks. Lydia played with the same intense focus she probably brought to board meetings, taking Maisie's trash talk in stride and giving as good as she got. "You're going down, small human," Lydia announced, making her move with a flourish. "That's what you think, old human," Maisie shot back, and Ethan had to turn away to hide his laughter at Lydia's expression of mock outrage. They played until Maisie declared herself hungry enough to eat a whole elephant, but only if it was made of chicken nuggets. And then they walked to the small cafe at the edge of the park. It was the kind of place that Lydia probably never visited, vinyl booths with duct-taped repairs, laminated menus sticky with age, coffee that came in mugs instead of cups with misspelled names. But she slid into the booth across from Ethan and Maisie like she'd been doing it her whole life, And when the waitress came to take their order, Lydia asked what was good with genuine interest. "Everything except the tuna melt," the waitress said. "That's a crime against tuna and humanity." "Noted. I'll have the grilled cheese." "Same," Maisie announced, "with extra pickles." "You hate pickles," Ethan pointed out. "I'm trying new things." Lydia said trying new things is how you grow. Ethan looked at Lydia, who shrugged with a small smile. "It came up during the rock collection review. We had a whole discussion about personal growth and geological formations." "Of course you did." Their food arrived, and Maisie discovered that she did, in fact, still hate pickles, but Lydia gallantly took them without complaint. They ate and talked about nothing important: favorite colors, best pizza toppings, whether dinosaurs would have made good pets. And Ethan watched his daughter glow under Lydia's complete attention, because that's what it was. Complete. Lydia had turned off her phone, hadn't checked it once, wasn't distracted or distant or counting the minutes until she could escape. She was just present. More present than most adults managed with their own kids, let alone someone else's. "Why don't you do this more often?" The question was out before Ethan could stop it. Lydia looked up from her grilled cheese. "Do what?" "This. Just be." Something flickered across her face, that same wounded vulnerability he'd glimpsed earlier. "I don't know how. I built my whole life around achievement, around doing. Being still feels like failing. But you're here now." "I am." She met his eyes. "I almost didn't come this morning. I sat in my car outside your house for 20 minutes, trying to convince myself to leave. That returning the rabbit was weird, that showing up unannounced was crossing a line." "What changed your mind?" "I remembered what you said last night, about how Maisie takes her rabbit everywhere because security matters more than looking cool. And I realized I've spent 34 years trying to look cool instead of feeling secure." She paused. "Your daughter hugs a stuffed rabbit. I restructure corporations, and somehow she seems happier. She's 6. She doesn't pay bills or manage employees or deal with any of the things that keep you up at night." "No," Lydia agreed, "but she also doesn't lie awake wondering if she matters. She knows she does, because you've built a life that shows her every single day." The words hit Ethan somewhere behind his ribs. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "I'm just doing my best." "That's my point." Lydia's smile was sad and soft at the same time. "You're doing your best, and it's enough. I've been doing my best my whole life, and it's never felt like anything but falling short." Before Ethan could respond, Maisie interrupted with a question about whether clouds had feelings, and the moment passed. But it didn't disappear. It settled between them like something alive, pulsing with possibility and danger in equal measure. They left the cafe as the afternoon light started to slant golden across the park. Maisie had convinced Lydia to teach her a hand-clapping game, and watching his CEO concentrate on pat-a-cake variations with the same intensity she probably brought to financial projections was possibly the most surreal thing Ethan had ever witnessed. "You're really good at this," Maisie announced as they nailed a particularly complex pattern. "I had a lot of practice," Lydia said. "Boarding school. When you're 8 years old and homesick, hand-clapping games are currency." "What's boarding school?" "It's where rich parents send their kids so they don't have to deal with them," Lydia said, and though her tone was light, something in it made Ethan's chest tighten. "That's sad," Maisie announced with her usual directness. "It was." Lydia stopped the game, letting her hands fall to her lap. "But I learned to be strong, to not need anyone." "Everybody needs someone," Maisie said, like she was explaining basic physics to someone who'd somehow missed the memo. "That's why we have families and friends and stuffed animals." "You're very wise for 6. "I know." Maisie stood up from the bench where they'd been sitting. "Come on, I want to show you the secret spot before we go home." She grabbed Lydia's hand and pulled her toward a cluster of trees at the far edge of the park. Ethan followed, watching the way Lydia let herself be led. The way she listened to Maisie's explanation of why this particular grove was secret, you could see the whole park, but nobody could see you, with complete seriousness. The secret spot was just a small clearing surrounded by trees, probably used by teenagers for activities Ethan didn't want to think about. But in Maisie's world, it was magic. a place where normal rules didn't apply, where imagination transformed ordinary ground into whatever you needed it to be. Daddy and I come here sometimes when things are hard, Maisie explained to Lydia. We sit and talk and nothing bad can reach us here. That sounds nice, Lydia said softly. Want to sit? They sat in a small circle on the ground, and Ethan found himself telling stories about the time Maisie had tried to save a worm from the sidewalk and accidentally dropped it in his coffee, about her first day of kindergarten when she'd announced she was going to teach everyone how to be nice, about the elaborate fairy house they'd built last summer from sticks and bottle caps. Lydia listened to all of it, and somewhere in the telling, something in her expression cracked open. Not broken, opened, like a door she'd kept locked for years finally swinging wide. I don't have stories like that, she said when Ethan finished. I have achievements, degrees, promotions, but I don't have this. Moments that mattered just because they were shared with someone who loved me. You could, Maisie said simply. You could have them now. How? You start by staying for dinner, Ethan heard himself say. If you want. Lydia turned to look at him, and the expression on her face was so raw, so openly hopeful, that he had to swallow against the sudden thickness in his throat. I'd like that, she whispered. I'd really like that. They walked home as the sun started its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Maisie chattered between them, but Ethan barely heard her. His entire awareness had narrowed to the woman walking beside him, to the careful space between them that felt both too wide and not wide enough. This was a mistake. He knew it was a mistake. You didn't invite your CEO to dinner. You didn't blur the lines between professional and personal. You didn't let your daughter get attached to someone who lived in a different world. But when they reached his front door and Lydia smiled at him, really smiled, with her whole face, like he'd just given her something precious, Ethan couldn't bring himself to care about the mistakes he was probably making. He opened the door and led her back into his home, into his life, into the small and imperfect world he'd built from the pieces of his shattered marriage. And as Maisie dragged Lydia toward the kitchen to help make dinner, chattering about spaghetti construction techniques, Ethan stood in his doorway and wondered how exactly his quiet Saturday morning had turned into this. Whatever this was. Whatever it was becoming. The spaghetti sauce was simmering on the stove when Ethan finally admitted to himself that nothing about this day was going according to any plan he'd ever made. Lydia stood at his counter, carefully measuring pasta under Maisie's exacting supervision, and the whole scene was so domestic, so completely removed from the reality of Monday morning meetings and quarterly reports, that Ethan felt like he'd stumbled into an alternate universe where CEOs wore borrowed aprons and took orders from 6-year-olds. More, Maisie instructed, peering into the pot. Daddy always makes too much because leftovers are a gift to your future self. Your father is full of wisdom, Lydia said, adding another handful of spaghetti. I know, that's why I keep him. Ethan stirred the sauce, hiding his smile. Through the kitchen window, he could see the sun sinking lower, painting everything in that particular golden light that made ordinary moments feel significant. The whole day had that quality now, ordinary things transformed into something else just by the simple fact of Lydia's presence. He still couldn't quite believe she was here, that she'd stayed, that she showed no signs of wanting to leave. Can you tell us about when you were little? Maisie asked, settling herself at the kitchen table with Mr. Hopscotch. Like, were you always a boss? Lydia turned from the stove, wiping her hands on the apron, Ethan's apron, the one with the faded "Kiss the Cook" slogan that he'd gotten as a gag gift years ago. I don't think anyone's always a boss. You grow into it. But were you bossy? Maisie, Ethan started. It's okay. Lydia came to sit at the table, and after a moment's hesitation, Ethan joined them, leaving the sauce to its slow simmer. I was very bossy, extremely bossy. I once organized all the girls in my dormitory into a protest because the cafeteria stopped serving chocolate pudding on Wednesdays. Maisie's eyes went wide. Did it work? We got pudding back, but I also got detention for 3 weeks. Lydia's smile was wry. Worth it, though. You have to stand up for what matters. Chocolate pudding matters? Everything matters if enough people care about it. Ethan watched his daughter process this with the seriousness she brought to all philosophical discussions. Did you have a daddy who made you spaghetti? The question landed like a stone in still water. Lydia's smile didn't exactly disappear, but it changed, became something more fragile, more careful. No, she said quietly. My father was very busy. He traveled a lot for work. And my mother, she was busy too. That's why I went to boarding school. So who made you dinner? The school cafeteria. Or later, when I was older, I learned to make things for myself. Nothing as good as this, though. She gestured at the kitchen, at the sauce bubbling on the stove, at the chaos of cooking that had somehow become communion. Maisie frowned, her small face scrunching up in the way it did when she encountered something that violated her understanding of how the world should work. But everybody needs someone to make them dinner. That's how you know you're loved. The words hung in the air, and Ethan saw something crack in Lydia's expression, not breaking, but opening, like ice beginning to thaw. I'm learning that, Lydia said, and her voice was so soft Ethan almost didn't hear it. I'm learning that now. Before the moment could stretch too thin, Maisie hopped off her chair with the resilience of childhood. I'm going to set the table. Lydia, do you want the purple plate or the blue one? The purple one is lucky, but the blue one has a chip that looks like a rabbit if you squint. Purple, please. I could use some luck. Maisie skipped to the cabinet, chattering about the complex mythology she'd built around their mismatched dishware, and Ethan found himself alone at the table with Lydia. She was looking at her hands, fingers laced together like she was trying to hold something in, or maybe hold herself together. She doesn't mean to pry, Ethan said quietly. She just doesn't understand that some questions are complicated. I like that about her. Lydia looked up, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears if she'd let them fall. She asks the questions adults learn to avoid, the ones that matter. Did no one make you dinner? The question came out rougher than Ethan intended. When you were her age? The staff did, very efficiently, balanced meals at appropriate times. Lydia's laugh was hollow. I had everything I needed. That's what they always said. I had the best schools, the best clothes, the best opportunities. I just didn't have... She trailed off, watching Maisie arrange plates with intense concentration. Someone who cared if you showed up to eat it, Ethan finished. Yes. The word was barely a whisper. That... Ethan wanted to reach across the table, to touch her hand, to offer some kind of comfort for a wound that was decades old but clearly still bleeding. Instead, he stood and went back to the stove, giving her space to compose herself while he drained the pasta. Dinner was chaotic and perfect. Maisie demonstrated her spaghetti twirling technique, which involved more sauce on her face than in her mouth. Lydia laughed so hard at one of Maisie's stories about playground politics that she nearly choked on her water. And Ethan sat there, watching the two of them together, feeling something dangerous taking root in his chest. This was what he'd wanted for Maisie since her mother left. Not just stability, but joy. Not just routine, but connection. The kind of easy warmth that filled a house and made it a home. He'd just never imagined finding it with Lydia Shaw, of all people. After dinner, Maisie insisted on showing Lydia her very important art project, which turned out to be an elaborate construction paper rendition of the solar system that took up most of her bedroom floor. This is Pluto, Maisie explained, pointing to a small gray circle decorated with glitter. I know some people say it's not a planet anymore, but that's mean. Just because you're small doesn't mean you don't matter. I completely agree, Lydia said seriously, crouching down to examine the solar system with genuine interest. Pluto matters. Size isn't everything. Exactly. That's what I told my teacher, but she said I needed to focus on the lesson plan. Lesson plans are important, but so is advocacy. You're fighting for Pluto. That's admirable. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, watching them. Lydia had been in his home for almost 12 hours now, and she still showed no signs of the professional distance he'd expected. If anything, she seemed more relaxed than when she'd arrived, like being here had released some pressure valve he hadn't known she was carrying. Daddy, can Lydia read me my bedtime story? Maisie asked, looking up from Pluto with hopeful eyes. Maisie, I'm sure Lydia needs to... I'd love to, Lydia interrupted. She glanced at Ethan. If that's okay? It wasn't okay. None of this was okay. This was his daughter, his routine, his carefully constructed life. Inviting Lydia into it felt like opening a door he might not be able to close. But looking at Maisie's eager face, at Lydia's uncertain hope, Ethan couldn't find it in himself to say no. "Okay," he said. "But teeth brushing first, non-negotiable." Maisie groaned but headed to the bathroom, and Ethan was left alone with Lydia in a bedroom decorated with fairy lights and drawings of improbable animals. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I know this is a lot. This whole day has been a lot. It's been perfect." Lydia stood, brushing imaginary dust from her jeans. "Is that weird? That this has been the best day I've had in longer than I can remember?" Maisie has that effect on people. It's not just Maisie. She met his eyes, and the directness of her gaze made his breath catch. "It's this. All of this. The mess and the noise and the way you two move around each other like a dance you've both memorized. It's watching you parent with patience and humor and love, and realizing that everything I thought mattered doesn't hold a candle to this." "Lydia, I sat in my apartment last night after the party, after you left, and I looked around at all my things, expensive furniture, art I bought because my designer said I should, a kitchen I've never cooked in, and I realized I've built a museum to success but forgotten to build a life." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to respond to this raw honesty from a woman who'd always seemed invincible. Before he could find words, Maisie bounded back into the room, toothbrush still in hand. "All clean, see?" She bared her teeth in an exaggerated smile. "Very impressive," Lydia said, her professional composure sliding back into place like armor. "Now, what are we reading?" The book Maisie selected was a battered copy of a story about a dragon who was afraid of fire. They settled onto Maisie's bed. Maisie in the middle, Lydia on one side, the book balanced between them. Ethan hovered in the doorway, not quite in, not quite out, watching. Lydia read with complete commitment, doing different voices for each character. The dragon sounded vaguely British. The knight sounded suspiciously like a surfer. The princess sounded exactly like Maisie, which made his daughter giggle uncontrollably. "You're really good at this," Maisie said when they reached the part where the dragon finally learned to breathe fire. "I used to read to myself a lot when I was little," Lydia admitted. "Different voices made it less lonely." "Were you lonely a lot?" "Yes." No hesitation, no softening of the truth. "I was lonely most of the time." Maisie considered this with her characteristic seriousness, then scooted closer to Lydia and rested her head against her shoulder. "You're not lonely now, though, right?" Lydia's hand came up slowly, carefully, to rest on Maisie's curls. "No," she whispered. "Right now, I'm not lonely at all." They finished the book, and by the time the dragon and the knight became friends and decided to open a bakery together, because of course they did, Maisie's eyes were drooping. Ethan stepped into the room to take over the tucking-in routine, but Maisie grabbed Lydia's hand. "Will you come back?" she asked sleepily. "Tomorrow?" Lydia glanced at Ethan, uncertainty flickering across her face. That's up to your dad, sweetheart." "Please, Daddy." Maisie's eyes were already half closed, but her grip on Lydia's hand remained firm. "Please?" Ethan should say no. Should establish boundaries, should remember that Monday was coming, and with it the return to reality where Lydia was his boss and he was just another employee. Should protect his daughter from getting attached to someone who lived in a completely different world. "Maybe," he heard himself say instead. "We'll see." It was enough for Maisie, who smiled and burrowed deeper into her blankets, Mr. Hopscotch tucked firmly under her chin. "Night, Daddy. Night, Lydia. Love you." The automatic "love you too" died on Ethan's lips as he realized Maisie had said it to both of them. Lydia had frozen, her hand still caught in Maisie's relaxing grip, her face a study in shock, and something that looked almost like pain. "Sweet dreams, brave girl," Lydia whispered instead, and then she was standing, carefully extracting her hand, moving toward the door with the careful control of someone trying not to run. Ethan kissed Maisie's forehead, turned on her nightlight, and followed Lydia into the hallway. She'd made it to the living room before stopping, standing in the middle of the space with her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold something in. "I should go," she said without turning around. It's late. I've imposed on your whole day. You probably have things to do, and I've just... Lydia. She turned, and in the soft light from the lamp in the corner, Ethan could see that she was crying. Not sobbing, not falling apart, just tears tracking silently down her face like they'd been held back so long they'd finally found a way out. I'm sorry, she said, wiping roughly at her cheeks. This is unprofessional. I should have left hours ago. I don't know what I was thinking, staying so long, getting so involved. She meant it, Ethan said quietly. When she said she loved you, Maisie doesn't say things she doesn't mean. I know. Lydia's voice cracked. That's what scares me. Because I've been here one day, one single day, and I already know I'm going to disappoint her. I'm going to go back to my office and my meetings and my life that doesn't have room for playground visits and bedtime stories, and she's going to wonder why I stopped coming around. And I can't... She pressed her hand to her mouth, cutting off the words. Ethan crossed the room before he could think better of it, before the rational part of his brain could catalog all the reasons this was a terrible idea. He stopped in front of her, close enough to see the mascara she'd never quite managed to wash off smudged under her eyes, close enough to count the tears still clinging to her lashes. What if you didn't? He asked. Didn't what? Go back to a life that doesn't have room. What if you made room? You don't understand. My whole life is structured around work. It's all I have. It's all I've ever had. Because you chose it that way? Or because you didn't know there were other options? Lydia looked at him like he'd asked a question in a language she didn't speak. I don't know. Both? Neither? I built the company from almost nothing. 16-hour days, 7 days a week, for years. I didn't have time for this. She gestured vaguely at the room, at the evidence of life lived. The toys in the corner, the photos on the wall, the blanket draped over the couch from the movie night he and Maisie had had last weekend. And now? Now I'm standing in your living room crying because a 6-year-old said she loved me, and I can't remember the last time anyone said that to me and meant it. Her laugh was broken. How pathetic is that? It's not pathetic, it's honest. Honesty doesn't pay the bills. No, Ethan agreed. But neither does success if you're too lonely to enjoy it. Lydia stared at him, and something in her expression shifted. When did you get so wise? Divorce and single parenthood. It's very educational. Tell me about her. Lydia moved to the couch and sat, tucking her legs under her in a way that made her look younger, more vulnerable. Your ex-wife. You've mentioned her a few times, but always in passing. Ethan should deflect, should keep that part of his life private, should maintain some boundaries in a day that had systematically demolished every professional barrier between them. Instead, he sat beside her, not too close, but not distant either, and found himself talking. Her name is Rachel. We met in college. She was brilliant and ambitious and so full of life that being around her felt like standing too close to a fire. We got married young, had Maisie younger. He paused, staring at his hands. And then Rachel realized that the life she thought she wanted, the husband, the kid, the stability, wasn't what she actually wanted at all. She left? She left. Moved to Seattle for a job opportunity she'd been too responsible to take when she was married. She sees Maisie twice a year, sends money religiously, calls on birthdays, but she's not a mother. Not really. That must have been devastating. It was freeing. The admission surprised him. I spent so long trying to be enough for someone who didn't want to be there. And then she was gone, and I realized I could just be a dad, be present, stop trying to convince someone to love the life we'd built. Lydia was quiet for a long moment. How do you do it? Let go of needing to be enough? I didn't let go of that. I just redirected it. Instead of trying to be enough for Rachel, I focused on being enough for Maisie. And that I can do. That has clear metrics. Did I show up? Did I listen? Did I make her feel safe and loved? Those are questions I can answer. And for yourself? Lydia asked quietly. Do you ever focus on being enough for yourself? The question hit harder than it should have. Ethan looked away, studying the pile of Maisie's library books on the coffee table that he kept meaning to return. I'm working on it, he said finally. We're a pair, aren't we? Lydia's smile was sad. You, forgetting yourself in parenthood. Me, forgetting myself in work. At least we're forgetting ourselves in things that matter. Do they matter if we lose ourselves completely? Ethan didn't have an answer for that. They sat in silence, the kind that felt comfortable despite the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Outside, streetlights flickered on. A car drove past. The world kept turning, indifferent to the small revolution happening in his living room. I didn't plan this, Lydia said finally. Staying all day, getting attached, feeling what? She turned to look at him, and the vulnerability in her eyes was almost painful to witness. Like I finally understand what I've been missing. Like walking into your home showed me everything my life doesn't have, and now I can't unknow it. Can't go back to my apartment and my smoothie deliveries and my empty calendar weekends without seeing them for what they are. What are they? A waste. The word came out fierce. A complete waste of a life. I'm 34 years old. I've built a billion-dollar company. I've been on magazine covers. I've given keynote speeches about success and ambition and breaking glass ceilings. And I came to your house this morning and realized that a 6-year-old with a stuffed rabbit has figured out something I'm still struggling to understand. What's that? That people matter more than achievements. That showing up matters more than succeeding. That love. She stopped, shaking her head. I don't even know what love looks like, not really. I know what it looks like in movies, in books, in the lives other people describe. But I've never... You loved someone today, Ethan said quietly. I watched you with Maisie. That was love. That was easy. She's impossible not to love. Love isn't supposed to be hard work. That's the point. Lydia laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. Everything in my life is hard work. I don't know how to do easy. You did it today. For 12 hours you did easy. You made pancakes and pushed swings and read bedtime stories. You did all of it without calculating the return on investment or measuring the productivity metrics. And it terrified me. She met his eyes. Ethan, it absolutely terrified me. Because I liked it, more than I've liked anything in years. And that means everything I've been chasing, everything I've sacrificed for. It might all be beside the point. Or, Ethan said carefully, it means you've been successful at one thing, and now you have the chance to be successful at something else too. You make it sound simple. It is simple. It's just not easy. But Lydia studied him, and Ethan felt pinned under the intensity of her gaze. She was looking at him the way she probably looked at acquisition targets or quarterly reports, analyzing, calculating, trying to find the hidden variables. What do you want? She asked finally. From me? From this? Whatever this is. Ethan should have a good answer ready. Should have thought about this during one of the 100 moments today when he'd caught himself watching her, wondering, imagining. But the truth was messy and complicated and absolutely inappropriate to say to his boss. I don't know, he admitted. I know what I should want: professional boundaries, clear separation between work and personal life, protection for Maisie from getting hurt if this all falls apart. But what I actually want... He trailed off. Tell me. I want tomorrow. I want to see if today was a fluke or if you really meant all of it. I want Maisie to wake up happy because she's going to see you again. And I want to stop thinking about Monday morning and what all of this means for my job and just exist in the moment, which is terrifying for someone who spent 3 years planning every detail to keep things stable for his kid. Lydia's expression softened. So we're both terrified. Seems like it. Want to be terrified together? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to examine. Ethan thought about Monday, about the office, about the very real consequences of blurring these lines. Then he thought about Lydia's face when Maisie hugged her, about her laughter at the park, about the way she'd looked reading that bedtime story, like she'd finally found something she'd been searching for without knowing she was looking. Yeah, he said. I think I do. Lydia's smile was tentative but real. Then I'll come back tomorrow, if the invitation still stands. It does. Okay. She stood, and Ethan stood with her, walking her to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob, turning back to face him. Thank you. For today. For letting me stay. For not thinking I was completely insane for showing up at your door at 7 in the morning. Thank you for showing up. They stood there, too close and not close enough. And Ethan felt the pull of possibility warring with every reasonable instinct he possessed. Lydia must have felt it too, because she took a step back, creating distance, rebuilding boundaries that had dissolved over the course of the day. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Lydia. She opened the door, stepped out into the cold January evening, and then turned back one more time. What time should I come tomorrow? Ethan found himself smiling. Maisie usually wakes up around 7:30, but maybe come at 8? Give us time to get presentable. 8 o'clock. I'll bring bagels. You don't have to. I want to. Her smile turned mischievous. I'm trying new things. Remember? Personal growth and geological formations. Then she was gone, walking down his driveway to her car, a sleek, expensive thing that looked absurdly out of place in his neighborhood. Ethan watched her drive away, watched her taillights disappear around the corner, and then closed the door and leaned against it. What had he just done? What had they just done? He walked back through his house, turning off lights, checking that Maisie was still asleep, trying to process a day that had started with a knock at his door and ended with a promise of tomorrow. The whole thing felt surreal, impossible. Like he'd wake up Monday morning and discover it had all been some stress-induced hallucination. But Mr. Hopscotch sat on Maisie's nightstand, returned and loved and safe. The dishes from dinner sat in the drying rack. Lydia's coffee cup from this morning still rested on the counter, lipstick staining the rim. It had happened, all of it. And tomorrow, it would happen again. Ethan picked up the coffee cup, turning it in his hands, studying the evidence of her presence in his home. Then he washed it carefully, dried it, and put it away with the others, not marking it as special, not treating it differently, just letting it be one cup among many. But he knew which one it was. Would probably always know which one it was. He turned off the kitchen light and headed to his own bedroom, passing Maisie's door and pausing to listen to her soft breathing. His daughter, who'd said she loved Lydia Shaw like it was the most natural thing in the world, who'd spent the day glowing under the complete attention of someone who'd never learned how to love but was clearly trying to figure it out. Ethan got ready for bed mechanically, his mind still processing. He set his alarm, plugged in his phone, and lay down in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easily. His brain kept replaying moments. Lydia's laugh at the park, her tears in his living room, the way she'd looked reading to Maisie with complete commitment. Each memory felt significant, weighted with meaning he wasn't ready to interpret. Somewhere around midnight, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I made it home. Thank you again for today. I haven't stopped smiling since I left. See you at 8. L. Ethan stared at the message, at the simple admission of happiness, at the careful signature that somehow made his chest ache. He saved the number under Lydia, and then, after a moment's hesitation, typed a response. Maisie's already planning tomorrow's activities. Fair warning, they involve a tea party and mandatory tiaras. Sleep well. The response came almost immediately. I've negotiated merger agreements in 3 countries. I think I can handle a tea party, though I've never worn a tiara. We'll need guidance. Maisie's an excellent teacher. You'll be fine, I hope so. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Lydia. He set the phone down and closed his eyes, and this time, sleep came easier. Tomorrow would bring its own complications. Monday would bring reality. But tonight, in the darkness of his room, Ethan let himself feel something he hadn't allowed in 3 years. Hope. Lydia arrived at 7:52 a.m. with 24 bagels, 3 types of cream cheese, and a pink sparkly tiara perched on her head. Ethan opened the door to find her standing on his porch, looking simultaneously ridiculous and radiant, her professional armor completely abandoned in favor of jeans and a soft gray sweater that made her look like someone's favorite aunt instead of a CEO, worth more than most small countries. You said mandatory tiaras, she said by way of greeting, adjusting the plastic crown with complete seriousness. I stopped at 3 different stores before I found one. Apparently, tiara availability at 7:30 on a Sunday morning is surprisingly limited. Ethan couldn't help it. He laughed, The kind of full-body laugh that shook his shoulders and made his eyes water. You didn't have to wear it to the door. Maisie said mandatory. I take instructions seriously. Lydia stepped inside, and Ethan caught that same light floral scent from yesterday, mixed now with the warm smell of fresh bagels. Though I will admit I got some interesting looks at the bagel shop. One woman asked if I was doing a birthday party breakfast delivery. What did you tell her? That it was something like that? Lydia's smile turned soft, which isn't entirely untrue. This feels like celebrating something. Before Ethan could figure out how to respond to that, Maisie came barreling down the hallway in her pajamas, stopped dead in her tracks, and let out a squeal that probably registered on seismographs. You came! And you're wearing a tiara! I told you I would. Lydia crouched down, still holding the bags of bagels. Do you approve of the tiara selection? I wasn't sure if pink was the right choice, but the sales associate assured me it was appropriate for most formal tea party occasions. Maisie circled Lydia like a jeweler examining a diamond, her face serious with concentration. It's perfect, but you need more sparkle. She disappeared back into her room and returned 30 seconds later with an armful of costume jewelry that looked like it had been collected over 6 years of birthday parties and dollar store visits. For the next 10 minutes, Ethan watched his boss, his CEO, the woman who commanded boardrooms and intimidated executives twice her age, sit cross-legged on his living room floor while his daughter draped her in plastic pearls, rubber bracelets, and clip-on earrings shaped like butterflies. Now you're ready, Maisie announced with satisfaction. Lydia stood, weighted down with approximately 3 pounds of plastic accessories, and struck a pose. How do I look? Like a queen, Maisie said reverently. Like someone who lost a fight with a jewelry store, Ethan offered, earning himself matching glares from both of them. Daddy doesn't understand fashion, Maisie informed Lydia seriously. He wears the same 3 shirts on rotation. They're comfortable shirts. They're boring shirts. Lydia was trying not to laugh. He could tell. Her lips were pressed together in that way people's lips pressed when they were fighting against a smile that wanted to break free. Perhaps we could stage a fashion intervention later, but first, should we address these bagels before they get cold? Breakfast was chaos in the best possible way. Maisie insisted on proper tea party etiquette, which apparently meant using paper plates she'd drawn elaborate designs on, sitting with perfect posture, and speaking in terrible British accents that made actual communication nearly impossible. Would you care for another crumpet? Maisie asked Lydia in an accent that sounded more like a cartoon pirate than anything resembling British. I would be delighted, my dear, Lydia responded, somehow managing to sound both dignified and completely absurd. Though I believe these are called bagels in the colonies. What are colonies? Ethan watched Lydia pause, a bagel halfway to her mouth, clearly trying to figure out how to explain British colonial history to a 6-year-old at a pretend tea party. Places that were very far away and had their own way of doing things. Like my room? Exactly like your room. They ate bagels and drank orange juice from Maisie's plastic tea set, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Ethan realized he was watching his daughter fall in love. Not romantic love. She was 6, and her primary relationship was still with Mr. Hopscotch, but the kind of love that happened when a child found an adult who saw them, really saw them, and chose to enter their world with complete commitment. Lydia wasn't humoring Maisie. She was participating. There was a difference, and that difference was written all over his daughter's face in the form of pure, unfiltered joy. After breakfast, Maisie declared they needed to go on an adventure, which in her 6-year-old vocabulary could mean anything from a walk around the block to a quest for dragons in the backyard. What kind of adventure? Ethan asked, already mentally cataloging the disaster zones his house could become if left unsupervised. A secret one. You'll see. Maisie grabbed both their hands and tugged them toward the door. But we need coats because adventures are always cold, even when they're warm. They ended up at the same park from yesterday, but Maisie led them past the playground to a small pond Ethan had honestly forgotten existed. It was more of a large puddle, really, surrounded by trees that had lost most of their leaves, and a bench that had seen better decades. This is my thinking spot, Maisie announced, settling herself on the bench with the gravity of someone sharing a closely guarded secret. When I need to figure out big things, I come here and watch the ducks. I don't see any ducks, Lydia said, scanning the water. That's because they're thinking too. They go underwater to think their biggest thoughts. Ethan bit back a smile. They'd had the duck conversation before. Maisie's elaborate theory about why ducks dove underwater involved a complex system of underwater philosophy and duck meditation that would have made Plato proud. Lydia, to her credit, nodded seriously. That makes sense. The best thinking does happen away from the surface. They sat on the bench, Maisie in the middle again, watching the empty pond. The morning sun filtered through the bare branches, creating patterns of light and shadow on the water. It was cold enough that Ethan could see his breath, but Maisie seemed content to sit in silence, which was unusual enough that he shot her a questioning look. "Are you thinking big thoughts?" he asked. "The biggest." Maisie swung her legs, heels knocking against the bench. "I'm thinking about how sometimes things you want really bad come true, but different than how you imagined." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Maisie looked up at Lydia, then at Ethan, her small face surprisingly solemn. "I wanted a mom, like a real one who stayed, and I prayed and wished and blew on dandelions and everything, but it didn't work because my real mom didn't want to stay." Ethan's chest tightened. They'd had versions of this conversation before, but never quite so directly, and definitely never with his boss sitting 3 feet away witnessing his daughter's raw honesty about their family's deepest wound. "But maybe," Maisie continued, her voice gaining confidence, "maybe the universe heard me wrong. Or right? I don't know. But maybe it sent Lydia instead, and she's not my mom, but she's something, and something is better than nothing." The silence that followed was so complete that Ethan could hear a car passing on the road half a mile away. Lydia had gone very still beside them, her hands clasped in her lap, her breathing careful and controlled. "Maisie," Ethan started, unsure what he was going to say, but feeling like he needed to say something. "I think," Lydia interrupted, her voice rough, "that the universe doesn't make mistakes. And I think that what you're feeling, wanting someone to stay, wanting someone to see you and choose you every single day, that's not wrong. That's the most right thing a person can want." "But you can't stay," Maisie said, and it wasn't a question. "You have important work and a big job, and you can't just stay here with us forever." Lydia looked at Ethan, something desperate and uncertain in her eyes, then back at Maisie. "No," she said quietly. "I can't stay forever. I have responsibilities, a company that needs me, but—" She paused, seeming to gather courage. "But staying forever and choosing to come back aren't the same thing. Your dad goes to work every day, right?" "Yeah." "But he comes back. Every single day he comes back to you, because you matter more than the work. Do you understand?" Maisie nodded slowly, processing this with the seriousness she brought to all important revelations. "I can't promise forever," Lydia continued, "but I can promise that if you want me to come back, I will. As much as I can. As much as you and your dad are comfortable with. Because these last 2 days," her voice cracked, "these have been the best 2 days I've had in longer than I can remember, and I don't want them to stop." "Really?" Maisie's eyes were wide. "Really? Being here, with you and your dad, has shown me what I've been missing, and I'm not ready to go back to missing it." Maisie considered this, her face scrunched in concentration. Then she turned to Ethan. "Daddy? Is that okay?" All eyes were on him now, and Ethan felt the weight of the moment pressing down like a physical thing. This was a choice point. He could gently extract them from this situation, could protect Maisie from potential disappointment, could maintain the boundaries that kept their lives stable and predictable. Or he could choose the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, this could work. "Yeah, baby," he heard himself say. "That's okay." Maisie's smile could have powered a small city. She threw her arms around both of them, somehow managing to hug 2 adults simultaneously, and Ethan found himself pressed against Lydia's shoulder, breathing in her scent, feeling her warmth, and wondering what exactly he'd just agreed to. When Maisie finally released them and ran off to investigate a stick that had apparently achieved supreme significance, Lydia turned to Ethan with tears in her eyes. "I meant it," she said quietly. "I know this is insane. I know we're crossing every professional line that exists. I know Monday is going to be complicated and messy and potentially disastrous for both of us, but I meant what I said to her. I know you did. Ethan watched Maisie perform what appeared to be an interpretive dance with the stick. That's what scares me. What scares you about it? That you mean it now, in this moment, when everything feels perfect and possible. But tomorrow, when you're back in your world and we're back in ours, will you still mean it? Or will this become another thing on your calendar that gets bumped when something more important comes up? The words came out harsher than he'd intended, carrying the weight of 3 years of being the only person Maisie could count on, 3 years of being careful about who he let into their lives because every person who left a mark. Lydia flinched but didn't look away. That's fair. That's absolutely fair. I have a track record of prioritizing work over everything else, of canceling plans and missing events, and choosing the urgent over the important. She took a breath. But I've also never had a reason to choose differently. I've never had anything in my personal life that mattered more than the next deal or the next meeting. Until now. Lydia, I'm not saying I'm going to be perfect at this. I'm probably going to mess up. I might work late when I should be here. I might get caught up in deadlines and forget to text back. I might have to travel or handle emergencies or do all the things that CEOs have to do. She met his eyes. But I want to try. I want to figure out how to make room in my life for this, for you and Maisie, even if I don't know how yet. Why? Ethan asked. Why does this matter so much to you? Lydia was quiet for a long moment, watching Maisie, who was now using the stick to conduct an imaginary orchestra. Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm living instead of achieving. Because watching you with Maisie showed me what love actually looks like when it's not transactional or conditional. Because sitting at your breakfast table made me happier than closing a billion-dollar deal ever has. She turned to face him fully. Because I'm 34 years old and I've spent my entire life building an empire while forgetting to build a life. And I'm tired of being lonely. The honesty of it, the raw vulnerability, hit Ethan somewhere behind his ribs. This was Lydia Shaw, the ice queen of the corporate world, admitting she was lonely, admitting she wanted something different, admitting she didn't have all the answers. Okay, he said quietly. Okay? Okay, we'll try. We'll figure this out, whatever this is. He ran a hand through his hair, the magnitude of what they were agreeing to settling over him. But we need rules, boundaries. Not because I don't trust you, but because Maisie needs stability. She needs to know what to expect. What kind of rules? I don't know yet. I've never done this before. Ethan laughed, the sound a little wild. I've never had my boss develop a friendship with my daughter. I'm pretty sure there's no handbook for this situation. We'll write our own handbook then? Lydia's smile was tentative but genuine. Rule number 1, honesty. If something isn't working, we say so. If one of us needs to step back, we communicate. No ghosting, no slowly fading away. We're adults. We use words. Rule number 2, Ethan added, Maisie comes first. If at any point this starts to hurt her, or confuse her, or make her life harder, we reevaluate, no matter how we feel about it. Agreed. Rule number 3, we keep work and this separate. What happens at the office stays at the office. What happens here? She gestured at the park, at Maisie, at the small world they'd built over 2 days, is separate, different, sacred. Can we do that? Can we actually keep those things separate when they're so tangled already? I don't know, Lydia admitted, but we can try. They sat in silence, the weight of their agreement settling between them. Maisie had abandoned her stick and was now attempting to skip stones on the pond, with approximately 0 success but 100% enthusiasm. What do we tell people? Ethan asked. About this. About us. About whatever we're doing. The truth? Lydia watched Maisie launch another stone that immediately plunked into the water. That we're friends, that I'm spending time with your family, that anything beyond that is private and not up for discussion. You think it'll be that simple? No, I think it'll be complicated and messy and people will talk. But I also think, she paused, choosing her words carefully, I think that for the first time in my adult life, I don't care what people think more than I care about doing what feels right. Maisie came running back, breathless and pink-cheeked from the cold. I skipped a stone, did you see? It went straight down, baby, Ethan said gently, but it skipped in my heart. Maisie placed her hand dramatically over her chest. And that's what counts. Lydia burst out laughing, the kind of uninhibited laughter that transformed her entire face. That is definitely what counts. Though maybe we could work on the technical aspects too. I used to skip stones with my grandfather. I could teach you. You had a grandfather? The question was so innocently delivered that Ethan almost missed the way Lydia's expression flickered. I did. He died when I was 12, but before that, he was the only person who... She stopped, swallowed. He was the only person who made me feel like I mattered for who I was, not what I could achieve. I bet he was nice, Maisie said with the casual certainty of childhood. He was the nicest. He used to take me to this lake upstate, just the two of us. We'd skip stones for hours. He said it was meditation in motion. What's meditation? It's when you quiet your brain and just exist. Maisie considered this. My brain is never quiet. It's very loud all the time. Mine too, Lydia admitted. Maybe that's why we both need stone skipping. They spent the next hour at the pond, Lydia teaching Maisie the mechanics of finding flat stones, the angle of release, the flick of the wrist that sent rocks dancing across water. Ethan watched from the bench, his daughter and his boss bent over the water's edge, their heads close together in concentration. This was real. Whatever was happening, whatever they were building, it was actually real. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, sitting in the cold January sun, watching the two most important women in his current life bond over stone skipping, Ethan felt something uncomfortably close to contentment. By the time they headed back to the house, Maisie had successfully skipped 3 stones. Lydia's jeans were muddy at the knees, and Ethan had taken approximately 30 photos on his phone that he would probably never show anyone, but couldn't bring himself to delete. Lunch was grilled cheese and tomato soup, eaten at the kitchen table while Maisie explained her detailed plans for becoming a professional stone skipper when she grew up. I'll travel the world, she announced between bites of sandwich, and I'll skip stones on every ocean and every lake and every pond. And people will say, there goes Maisie Parker, the world's greatest stone skipper, and they'll be right. That sounds like an excellent career plan, Lydia said seriously. Very focused, clear objectives. I approve. Will you come watch me when I'm famous? Front row seat. I'll be your biggest fan. The promise was made so easily, so naturally, that Ethan almost missed the significance of it. But Maisie didn't. Her face lit up like someone had switched on a light from the inside. Really? Really, though you might have to save me a seat. I imagine professional stone skipping competitions are very popular. They cleaned up lunch together, moving around the kitchen in a choreography that was starting to feel familiar. Lydia washed, Ethan dried, Maisie put away dishes in the haphazard system that made sense only to her. What now? Lydia asked when the last plate was put away. Now we usually have quiet time, Ethan explained. Maisie reads or colors, I catch up on laundry or emails, we decompress before the evening chaos. Should I go? The question came out carefully neutral, but Ethan heard the uncertainty underneath. He looked at Maisie, who was watching them both with the intensity of someone trying to will a particular outcome into existence. You could stay, he heard himself say, for quiet time, if you want. I want. Maisie cheered and dragged Lydia toward the living room, already explaining the complex rules of quiet time that mostly seemed to involve being quiet, except when you had something important to say, which was apparently often. Ethan watched them settle on the couch together, Maisie with a coloring book and Lydia with one of the books from his shelf that she'd apparently been eyeing earlier. They sat side by side, comfortable in their silence, and something in Ethan's chest twisted so hard he had to look away. He busied himself with actual quiet time activities, answering emails, sorting mail, starting a load of laundry. But his awareness kept drifting back to the living room, to the soft sound of pages turning and crayons scratching across paper. An hour passed in comfortable silence. Then Maisie's voice, sleepy and content. Lydia? Are you happy you found Mr. Hopscotch? A pause. Then, soft enough that Ethan almost missed it from the kitchen. Finding Mr. Hopscotch led me here. So yes, I'm happier about that than almost anything else I've ever done. Ethan stood at the sink, hands in soapy water, and let that settle over him. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow was reality. Tomorrow was complications and consequences and the collision of two worlds that were never meant to intersect. But today was Sunday. Today was stone skipping and grilled cheese and quiet time on the couch. Today was his daughter coloring while his boss read a book, both of them content in the small, imperfect world he'd built. Today was enough. The afternoon drifted into evening with the lazy inevitability of Sundays everywhere. Maisie eventually fell asleep on the couch, curled against Lydia's side like it was the most natural thing in the world. Lydia had stopped reading, her hand resting gently on Maisie's back, her expression soft and unguarded in a way Ethan had never seen at work. He stood in the doorway, phone in hand, torn between capturing the moment and letting it exist only in memory. "Take the picture," Lydia said quietly, not opening her eyes. "I can feel you debating it. How did you—" "I'm very good at sensing when people are watching me. It's a survival skill in corporate environments." Ethan took the picture, the click of the camera shutter loud in the quiet house. Lydia opened her eyes then, meeting his gaze across the room, and something passed between them, an understanding, an acknowledgement of what they were building and how fragile it still was. "I should probably go soon," she whispered, careful not to wake Maisie. "Let you two have your evening routine. You could stay for dinner if you want, nothing fancy, just spaghetti leftovers." "I had spaghetti leftovers for lunch yesterday in my apartment, alone. They tasted like cardboard and regret." Lydia's smile was crooked. "I'd love to stay." Ethan carefully extracted Maisie from Lydia's side, carrying his daughter to her room for a proper nap. When he returned, Lydia was in the kitchen, already pulling containers from the refrigerator with the confidence of someone who'd memorized his kitchen layout in just 2 days. They reheated spaghetti in comfortable silence, moving around each other with increasing ease. It was domestic and ordinary and absolutely surreal, and Ethan kept waiting for the moment when it would feel wrong or forced or like they were playing house. That moment never came. Maisie woke up an hour later, groggy and disoriented until she saw Lydia still there, at which point she perked up like someone had injected her with pure joy. Dinner was quieter than lunch, all of them feeling the weight of the day, the approaching end of the weekend, the reality that waited just on the other side of midnight. "Do you have to work tomorrow?" Maisie asked Lydia through a mouthful of spaghetti. "I do. I have meetings starting at 8. That's early." "It is, but that's part of the job." "Will we see you after work?" Lydia glanced at Ethan, uncertainty flickering across her face. He could see her calculating, trying to figure out what was appropriate, what was sustainable, what promises she could actually keep. "Not tomorrow," Ethan said gently, saving her from having to answer. "Lydia's going to be very busy this week, and we have our routine too, school and homework and all the usual stuff." Maisie's face fell. But, Lydia interrupted, "maybe next weekend? If that's okay with your dad." Another choice point. Another moment where Ethan could step back, could slow this down, could protect them all from the inevitable complications. "Next weekend sounds good," he said instead. They finished dinner, and this time when Lydia helped clean up, it felt less like a guest being polite and more like family sharing responsibilities. The shift was subtle but unmistakable, and from the way Lydia's hands hesitated over the dish towel, Ethan knew she felt it too. At the door, Maisie hugged Lydia with the fierce desperation of someone who knew separation was coming and wasn't ready for it. "I'll miss you," Maisie said into Lydia's sweater. "I'll miss you too, brave girl." Lydia knelt down, bringing herself to Maisie's level. "But I'll think about you every day, and next weekend will come before you know it." "Promise?" "I promise." Maisie finally released her, and Lydia stood, turning to Ethan. They stood facing each other in the doorway, two people who'd spent an entire weekend dismantling the careful boundaries between their worlds and now had to figure out how to exist in both. "Thank you," Lydia said quietly, "for letting me in, for trusting me with this, with her." "Thank you for showing up." Ethan met her eyes, literally and figuratively. Lydia's laugh was soft. "I'll see you Monday?" "Monday," he confirmed, and the word hung between them loaded with everything they weren't saying. She left then, disappearing into the darkness, and Ethan closed the door on a weekend that had changed everything while changing nothing at all. Tomorrow they would be boss and employee again. Tomorrow they would navigate the careful dance of professional distance. Tomorrow they would pretend that these 2 days hadn't happened, or at least that they didn't matter. But standing in his living room, listening to Maisie chatter about all the things she wanted to show Lydia next weekend, Ethan knew the pretending would be the hardest work he'd ever done. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train. Ethan stood in front of his closet at 6:15, staring at his work clothes like they belonged to a stranger. 3 shirts on rotation, Maisie had said, and she wasn't wrong. He pulled out the blue one, safe, professional, unremarkable, and tried not to think about how Lydia had seen him in sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, had eaten pancakes at his kitchen table, had fallen asleep on his couch with his daughter curled against her side. The office felt like a different planet now, a planet where he knew the rules but could no longer remember why they mattered. He drove Maisie to school in silence, his daughter uncharacteristically quiet in the back seat. When he pulled up to drop off, she unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't immediately jump out like usual. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby." "Will Lydia be different now? At work?" The question hit him square in the chest. Of course Maisie had been thinking about this. Of course she'd been worrying about what Monday would mean. "She'll be the same Lydia you met this weekend," Ethan said carefully. "But she'll also be doing her job, and her job is very important and requires her to be professional and focused." "So she won't talk to you about me?" "I don't know, sweetheart. We didn't really figure out all the rules yet." Maisie processed this, her face scrunched in concentration. "That seems silly. Why do you need rules about talking to each other?" "Because grown-up life is complicated." "Grown-up life sounds exhausting," Maisie announced, grabbing her backpack. "I'm never growing up." She kissed his cheek and bounded out of the car before Ethan could respond, her resilience once again saving him from having to explain things he didn't fully understand himself. The office building loomed ahead as Ethan pulled into the parking garage at 7:40. He sat in his car for 10 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to prepare himself for whatever the day would bring. Would Lydia acknowledge him? Would she pretend nothing had happened? Would there be some middle ground between boss and friend that they could navigate without combusting? He had no idea. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt interminable. Jason got on at the 3rd floor, already talking about some disaster with the Peterson account, and Ethan made appropriate listening noises while his brain cataloged everything that could go wrong in the next 8 hours. "You okay?" Jason asked as they approached their floor. "You look like you're about to throw up or rob a bank, possibly both." "Just tired. Long weekend." "Yeah? Do anything interesting?" Ethan thought about pancakes and park swings and his CEO wearing a plastic tiara. "Not really. Just hung out with Maisie." The elevator doors opened, and Ethan stepped into the familiar chaos of Monday morning at Shaw Industries. People rushed past with coffee cups and laptop bags, the energy frantic in that particular way that came from 2 days away from email, followed by the cold shock of Monday reality. He made it to his desk without incident, dropped his bag, and had just sat down when his computer pinged with a meeting invitation. From Lydia Shaw. Subject: Strategy discussion time, 9 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. Location: Conference Room C. Ethan stared at the invitation, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. A private meeting, 30 minutes. Conference Room C, which was the small one at the end of the hall that almost nobody used. He accepted the invitation and spent the next hour and 17 minutes trying to focus on his actual work, while his brain ran through every possible scenario for what this meeting might mean. At 8:58, Ethan stood outside Conference Room C, straightening his tie and feeling ridiculous about the nervous energy crackling under his skin. It was just Lydia. He'd spent an entire weekend with her. He'd watched her wear a tiara and skip stones and read bedtime stories. This shouldn't be terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. He knocked once and heard her voice call out, "Come in?" Lydia sat at the small conference table, laptop open in front of her, looking every inch the CEO she was. The tiara was gone, replaced by perfectly styled hair. The soft sweater had been swapped for a tailored suit in charcoal gray. Even her expression was different, more controlled, more carefully neutral. But when she looked up at him, something in her eyes was still the same woman who'd cried in his living room, and Ethan felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Close the door," she said quietly. He did, then stood there awkwardly, unsure whether to sit or remain standing, whether this was a professional meeting or something else entirely. "Sit, please," Lydia gestured to the chair across from her. "I wanted to talk before the day got away from us." Ethan sat, and they looked at each other across the table. The same table where they'd sat at the company party, the same table where this had all started just 3 days ago. "This is weird," Lydia said finally, and the admission broke something open. "I sat through a 7:30 meeting with the executive team, and all I could think about was whether Maisie got to school okay, and whether you were nervous about today, and whether I'd completely destroyed any chance of maintaining professional boundaries by spending an entire weekend playing Tea Party. Maisie got to school fine. And yeah, I was nervous. Still am, actually." "Me too." Lydia closed her laptop, giving him her full attention. "I've been CEO for 6 years. I've navigated hostile takeovers and board rebellions and market crashes. And sitting in that conference room trying to focus on Q1 projections while wondering if you regret this weekend was the hardest thing I've done in months." "I don't regret it," Ethan said quickly. "I'm terrified of what it means and how we navigate it, but I don't regret it." "Good. Because I don't either." She took a breath. "But we need to figure out how this works, how we work, because I can't—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I can't go back to pretending you're just another employee. Not after this weekend. But I also can't let personal feelings compromise my judgment or create perceptions of favoritism or make your life here harder." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need actual rules, real boundaries, not just good intentions and hope." Lydia pulled out a notepad, an actual physical notepad, which felt oddly significant, and clicked her pen. "So let's figure this out. What do we need to make this work?" Ethan stared at her, at the determined set of her jaw, at the way she was approaching this like a business problem that could be solved through proper planning and clear communication. It was so quintessentially Lydia that he almost laughed. "Okay," he said. "First rule. At work, you're my boss. Not my friend, not Maisie's friend. My boss. That means no special treatment, no private meetings that aren't about actual work, no conversations about personal stuff in professional spaces." Lydia wrote this down, nodding. "Agreed. Second rule, if there's a conflict between work and personal, we address it immediately. We don't let resentment build or assumptions fester. We communicate like adults." Third rule, Maisie doesn't come to the office, ever. I don't want her world and this world to overlap. It's too confusing." "That makes sense." Lydia's pen paused. "Though that means I only see her on weekends. Unless you want to do evening visits sometimes, after work." "But that's—" Ethan stopped, suddenly aware of what he was suggesting. Evening visits, dinner, a standing presence in their lives beyond weekend adventures. "I'd like that," Lydia said quietly. "If you're comfortable with it. Maybe once or twice a week. Nothing that disrupts your routine, but enough that Maisie knows I'm not disappearing." "Okay, yeah, that could work." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Fourth rule, we don't tell anyone at work. Not because I'm ashamed, but because it's private and none of their business, and would create exactly the kind of complications we're trying to avoid," Lydia finished. "Agreed. Though people will probably notice something eventually. We need to decide how we handle questions. We tell them we're friends, that you've met Maisie through work events, and we sometimes spend time together outside the office." "Which is all true. Just not the complete truth. Is anyone entitled to the complete truth about our personal lives?" Lydia smiled, small and approving. "No, they're not." "Okay. Fifth rule, you come to me immediately if anyone gives you grief about our relationship, professional or otherwise. I won't tolerate people making your work life difficult because of choices I've made. That goes both ways. If the board or investors or anyone starts questioning your judgment because you're spending time with an employee's family, you tell me. I'll step back if I need to." "You won't need to." The certainty in her voice was absolute. but I appreciate the offer. They sat in silence for a moment, both looking at the notepad where Lydia had written their rules in neat, precise handwriting. 5 rules to govern a relationship that defied every conventional boundary. 5 rules to protect a connection that probably shouldn't exist but did anyway. "This is insane," Ethan said finally. "You know that, right? This whole thing is absolutely insane." "Completely." Lydia met his eyes. "But I've spent my whole life doing the sensible thing, building the company, making the smart decisions, choosing logic over feeling. And where did it get me? Alone in an expensive apartment, eating delivered smoothies, wondering why success felt so much like failure. And now? Now I'm breaking every rule in the book because a 6-year-old taught me more about life in 2 days than I learned in 34 years of trying to be perfect." She closed the notepad. "So yes, it's insane, but it's also the sanest thing I've done in years." Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed with a reminder about his own 9:30 meeting. Reality, insistent and unavoidable. "I should go," he said, standing. "But Lydia, thank you for this, for wanting to figure it out instead of just walking away. I told Maisie I'd come back. I keep my promises." She stood too, and for a moment they faced each other across the small space of the conference room. "Besides, walking away would be the easy choice, and I'm trying to stop taking the easy way out." Ethan left the conference room feeling lighter than when he'd entered. The knot of anxiety in his chest loosened, if not entirely gone. They had rules now, boundaries, a framework for navigating the impossible. It still felt fragile and uncertain, but it also felt possible. The week unfolded with the grinding predictability of corporate life. Meetings and deadlines and the endless churn of work that filled days without making them meaningful. Ethan fell into his routine, and on the surface, everything looked exactly as it had before Lydia knocked on his door with a stuffed rabbit. But underneath, everything had changed. He saw Lydia in meetings now and watched her command rooms with the same decisive authority she'd always had. But he also saw the moments when her mask slipped, the way her shoulders relaxed when difficult conversations ended, the small smile that flickered across her face when someone made a joke, the exhaustion she tried to hide behind perfect makeup and professional competence. She was still his boss, still the CEO, still someone he addressed formally in professional contexts and whose directives he followed without question. But she was also the woman who'd worn a plastic tiara in his kitchen, who'd taught his daughter to skip stones, who'd admitted she was lonely with tears in her eyes. The duality was disorienting. Wednesday afternoon, Ethan was in the break room refilling his coffee when Marcus from accounting cornered him by the creamer. "Hey, did you hear Shaw's been in a good mood this week?" Jenkins said she actually smiled during the budget review. Smiled, without it being terrifying. Ethan carefully measured creamer into his coffee. "Maybe she got good news about something." "Maybe she's finally getting laid," Marcus said with the casual crudeness of someone who thought they were being funny. "That woman needs to relax. All work and no play makes Lydia a very scary boss." Ethan's hand tightened on his coffee cup. "That's inappropriate." "What? I'm just saying, you're just being disrespectful about someone who could fire you without blinking." Ethan met Marcus's eyes. "Maybe focus on your own life instead of speculating about hers." He left before Marcus could respond, his heart pounding with anger he couldn't fully express. This was exactly what they'd been trying to avoid. The speculation, the assumptions, the casual disrespect that came when people didn't see someone as fully human. Back at his desk, Ethan pulled up his email and typed quickly. To Lydia Shaw. Subject FYI. Message: people are noticing you're in a better mood. You might want to dial back the smiling if you want to maintain your terrifying reputation. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then immediately worried he'd crossed a line. This wasn't professional communication. This wasn't about work. This was... His computer pinged. From Lydia Shaw. Subject REFYI. Message: noted. Will resume glaring at people immediately. Though I'm blaming you if productivity drops because everyone's too scared to make eye contact. Ethan found himself grinning at his screen like an idiot. He typed back. To Lydia Shaw. Subject REFYI. Message: pretty sure terror-based productivity was already your management style. I'm just suggesting you maintain consistency. From Lydia Shaw. Subject, REFYI. Message, you're absolutely right. I'll cancel the team building exercise I was planning and replace it with an unexpected audit. Thanks for keeping me on brand. They shouldn't be doing this, shouldn't be having playful email exchanges in the middle of the workday. It violated their own rules about keeping professional and personal separate. But Ethan couldn't bring himself to care. Thursday evening, Lydia came over for dinner for the first time since the weekend. She arrived at 6:30 with Thai takeout and an apology for being 10 minutes late because her 4 o'clock meeting had run over. Maisie launched herself at Lydia with the enthusiasm of someone reuniting with a soldier returning from war, and Ethan watched his boss, his CEO, the woman who controlled his professional fate, hug his daughter with the same fierce affection Maisie offered. "I missed you so much," Maisie said, pulling back to examine Lydia's face like she was checking for changes. "Did you miss me?" "Every single day." Lydia set down the takeout bags and crouched to Maisie's level. "I thought about you during boring meetings and wished you were there to make them more interesting. I would have been so interesting. I would have asked so many questions." "That's exactly what I thought." They ate pad thai and spring rolls around the kitchen table, and Maisie dominated the conversation with detailed accounts of everything that had happened at school that week. Lydia listened with complete attention, asking follow-up questions and making appropriate impressed noises, and Ethan felt something in his chest crack wider open. This was what Maisie needed, what she'd been missing since Rachel left. Not a mother specifically, but someone else who chose to show up, who chose to care, who chose to be present in the unglamorous day-to-day of childhood. After dinner, Maisie dragged Lydia to her room to show her a new drawing she'd made, something involving unicorns and spaceships that defied conventional physics but made perfect 6-year-old logic. Ethan cleaned up the kitchen, listening to their voices drift down the hallway, Maisie's high and excited, Lydia's lower and warm with genuine interest. His phone buzzed. A text from Jason. "Drinks tomorrow after work? Peterson account finally closed and I need to celebrate by complaining about it." Ethan started to type yes, then hesitated. Friday night. Which meant Maisie would be home. Which meant asking his mom to babysit. Which felt ridiculous when Lydia was planning to come over anyway. He walked down the hallway and knocked on Maisie's open door. They both looked up from the drawing, faces similarly focused. "Sorry to interrupt, but quick question. Lydia, are you planning to come over tomorrow night?" Something flickered across her face. Surprise, then pleasure, then careful neutrality. "I was hoping to, if that works for you." "Could you stay late? Like past Maisie's bedtime? I got invited to drinks with a coworker and normally I'd skip, but you should go," Lydia finished. She looked at Maisie. "What do you think? Can I handle bedtime duty on my own?" "Can you do voices?" Maisie asked seriously. "I did voices last weekend." "But can you do them every time? Because Daddy does voices every time, and that's very important." "I will do my very best voices," Lydia promised. "And if they're not good enough, you have permission to give me constructive feedback." Maisie considered this, then nodded. "Okay, you can do bedtime." Just like that, it was settled. Ethan was going out for drinks while his boss babysat his daughter, and somehow this had become his life. Friday after work, Ethan came home to find Lydia already there, still in her work clothes, but with her shoes off and her jacket draped over a chair. She and Maisie were making dinner together, or more accurately, Maisie was making dinner while Lydia followed instructions and tried not to catastrophically mess up the macaroni and cheese. "You're home," Maisie announced. "Lydia's learning to cook. She's not very good yet, but she's trying very hard." "I appreciate your faith in my learning capacity," Lydia said dryly, stirring the pot with intense concentration. Ethan grabbed a quick shower and changed into jeans and a sweater that didn't smell like office air conditioning. When he came back to the kitchen, dinner was on the table and Lydia had somehow acquired an apron, his apron, the Kiss the Cook one, and was serving macaroni like she'd been doing it her whole life. They ate together, the three of them, and it felt so normal that Ethan kept waiting for someone to point out how abnormal it actually was. But nobody did. Maisie chattered about school. Lydia asked questions about homework and friends and whether the cafeteria had served anything edible that week. And Ethan sat there, watching them, feeling the future take shape in ways he couldn't quite name. At 7:15, Ethan kissed Maisie goodbye and headed out to meet Jason, leaving his daughter with his boss, trusting her with the most important thing in his world. The bar was loud and crowded, filled with Friday night energy and the desperate cheer of people trying to convince themselves the weekend would be worth the week they'd survived. Jason was already there, 2 beers deep and ready to complain. "Finally! I thought you were going to bail." "Almost did." Ethan slid into the booth and accepted the beer Jason pushed toward him. "Long week. Tell me about it." The Peterson account was a nightmare from start to finish, and now Jenkins wants me to... Jason launched into a detailed complaint about office politics and impossible deadlines, and Ethan made appropriate listening noises while his mind drifted back to his house, where Lydia was probably reading bedtime stories with the same commitment she brought to board meetings. "You're not listening," Jason said, kicking him under the table. "Sorry, distracted." "By what?" "You look like someone with a secret." Ethan took a long drink of his beer. "Just thinking about Maisie, making sure she's okay." "Where is she?" "Home. With a friend." "Must be a good friend if you trust them with bedtime." "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "She is." Jason studied him with the intensity of someone who'd known him for 3 years and could read the spaces between words. "Okay, what's going on? You've been weird all week, smiling at random times, checking your phone constantly. Either you met someone or you're having a breakdown, and I'm really hoping it's the first one." "I met someone." The admission surprised Ethan as much as it clearly surprised Jason. He hadn't meant to say it, hadn't planned to tell anyone, but sitting in this loud bar, drinking beer and pretending everything was normal while his entire life was reshaping itself, the secret felt too heavy to carry alone. "Holy shit, really?" Jason leaned forward. "Tell me everything. Who is she? How'd you meet? Is it serious?" "It's complicated. The best ones always are." Ethan thought about rules and boundaries and the careful framework they'd built to protect something that probably shouldn't exist. "We're taking it slow, figuring things out. She's great with Maisie, which is the most important thing." "Maisie's met her already? Damn, that is serious. You never introduced Maisie to anyone." "This is different." "Different how?" "Different because she's my boss," Ethan thought but didn't say. "Different because she spent an entire weekend in my house and cried when my daughter said she loved her. Different because I'm falling for someone who lives in a completely different world and I have no idea how to make this work without destroying everything." "Just different," he said instead. "Good different. Terrifying different." Jason raised his beer. "To terrifying different. May it work out better than your marriage did." They clinked glasses, and Ethan let the conversation drift to safer topics: sports, movies, Jason's ongoing war with his HOA. But part of his attention stayed with his phone, waiting for the text that would tell him Maisie was asleep and everything was okay. The text came at 8:45. "Mission accomplished. She did voices better than me, apparently, but I was allowed to finish the book anyway. She's asleep. Your daughter is magical. L." Ethan smiled at his phone, then typed back. "She really is. Thank you for doing this. I owe you." "You don't owe me anything. This was the highlight of my day. Take your time. I'll be here when you get back." He stayed another hour, nursing his beer and half listening to Jason's stories, but his mind was already home. At 9:30, he made his excuses and headed back to find Lydia curled up on his couch, reading the same book she'd been working through last weekend. She looked up when he came in, and her smile was soft and genuine and completely unguarded. "How was it?" "Fine. Good. I mostly thought about getting back here." Ethan dropped his keys on the counter and joined her on the couch, maintaining careful distance. "How was bedtime?" "Perfect. She informed me my dragon voice needs work, but my princess voice is acceptable. We've negotiated that I'll practice the dragon voice before next time." Lydia closed the book. "Ethan, she's amazing. Spending time with her feels like remembering what joy looks like. She has that effect on people." "Not just her." Lydia met his eyes. "Being here, in your home, with your family. It feels like waking up from a dream I didn't know I was having." They sat in the quiet of his living room, the space between them charged with everything they weren't saying. Ethan knew he should maintain distance, should remember the rules they'd set, should protect himself from the dangerous hope growing in his chest. Instead, he shifted closer, close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough to feel her warmth. "I told Jason I met someone," he said quietly. Lydia went very still. "What did you tell him?" "That it was complicated, that she was great with Maisie, that I was terrified." He turned to look at her. "I didn't tell him who, but I wanted to. I wanted to tell someone that I'm falling for a woman who wore a plastic tiara in my kitchen and cried over bedtime stories and makes me feel like maybe the future doesn't have to look like the past. Ethan, I know we have rules. I know we're supposed to keep this separate and professional and carefully boundaried, but Lydia, I can't—" He stopped, trying to find words for feelings that were too big and too new and too terrifying to name. "I can't keep pretending this is just friendship, that you're just someone who's good with my kid, that this weekend didn't change everything." Lydia's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between finding a stuffed rabbit and watching you read bedtime stories, I stopped seeing you as my boss. I started seeing you as someone I could—" He swallowed hard. "Someone I could love. If we let this become what it wants to be." The silence stretched between them, and Ethan watched emotions flicker across Lydia's face too quickly to name. Then she reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I walked into your house last Saturday planning to drop off a toy and leave," she said, her voice rough. "I was going to be polite and professional and maintain appropriate distance. And then Maisie hugged me, and you made pancakes. And I realized I'd been living half a life for so long, I'd forgotten what a whole one looked like." "Lydia, I'm falling too," she interrupted. "For both of you. For Maisie's joy and your patience, and the life you've built from broken pieces. For the way you look at your daughter like she hung the moon. For the way you make me feel like I could belong somewhere that isn't a boardroom." She squeezed his hand. "I'm terrified. I'm so terrified I can barely breathe sometimes. But I don't want to walk away." "Then don't. It won't be easy. People will talk. The board might object. Your life will get complicated in ways you can't predict. My life got complicated the moment you knocked on my door." Ethan shifted closer, close enough to see flecks of gold in her gray eyes. "But it also got better. Richer. Full of possibility I'd stopped believing in." They sat there, hands intertwined, balanced on the edge of something that could change everything or destroy it all. Then Lydia leaned forward, slow and careful, giving him time to pull away. He didn't pull away. Their kiss was gentle and tentative and tasted like hope and fear in equal measure. When they broke apart, Lydia was crying again, but smiling through the tears. "What do we do now?" she whispered. "Now we figure it out. Together, one day at a time." Ethan brushed a tear from her cheek. "Starting with Monday." "Monday," she repeated, and it sounded less like a threat and more like a promise. They sat together on his couch until midnight, talking through logistics and concerns and all the practical realities of trying to build something real from an impossible beginning. And when Lydia finally left, driving away into the darkness, Ethan stood at his door and felt the future opening up before him like a door he'd been too afraid to walk through. Everything was about to change. He was ready. The weekend passed in a blur of carefully constructed normalcy that felt anything but normal. Lydia came over Saturday morning with bagels again, and this time when Maisie hugged her at the door, Ethan saw his daughter's face and knew she'd already started building a future in her mind where this was permanent, where Lydia didn't leave, where their small family of 2 had expanded to 3. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, standing in his kitchen watching Lydia help Maisie make chocolate chip pancakes, their weekend tradition now, apparently, Ethan felt something settle in his chest that felt dangerously close to certainty. Sunday evening, after Lydia left with promises to see them during the week, Maisie climbed into Ethan's lap on the couch and asked the question he'd been dreading. "Is Lydia going to be my new mommy?" Ethan's heart stopped. He pulled back to look at his daughter's face, searching for signs of what she wanted the answer to be. "Would you want that?" he asked carefully. Maisie's expression was serious, thoughtful in the way she got when processing something important. "I don't know. My real mommy didn't want to stay. What if Lydia doesn't want to stay either? Lydia's not your real mom, sweetheart. She's... Ethan paused, trying to find words for something he didn't fully understand himself. She's someone who cares about us very much, someone who wants to be part of our lives, but that doesn't mean she's replacing your mom. My mom doesn't want to be replaced. She's not even here to be replaced. The blunt truth of it hit Ethan like a physical blow. I know, baby, and that's hard. It's okay if it's hard. But Lydia wants to be here, right? She does. Very much. Maisie processed this, her small face scrunched in concentration. Okay, then she can be Lydia. Not a new mommy, just Lydia who loves us and makes pancakes and does funny voices. I think Lydia would really like that. Good. Maisie snuggled deeper into his arms. Because I really like her, Daddy. Like, really, really like her. The kind of like where it would hurt if she left. Ethan held his daughter tighter, feeling the weight of her trust, the responsibility of protecting her heart while also letting her open it. I really like her too, baby. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure she doesn't leave. Promise? I promise I'll try my very best. It was the most honest answer he could give, and Maisie seemed satisfied with it. She fell asleep in his arms 20 minutes later, and Ethan carried her to bed, tucking her in with Mr. Hopscotch, and the fierce hope that he wasn't setting her up for another abandonment. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Ethan dropped Maisie at school, drove to work, and sat in the parking garage for 15 minutes, trying to prepare himself for whatever came next. Everything felt different now. The kiss had changed things. The admissions they'd made had shifted the ground beneath them. At his desk by 8, Ethan tried to focus on actual work, but his attention kept drifting to the executive floor 2 levels up, where Lydia was probably already in her first meeting, commanding rooms and making decisions that affected hundreds of people. His computer pinged at 9:30. From Lydia Shaw. Subject: Meeting request. Message: My office. 10 a.m. And yes, this is about actual work. I have a proposal I want to discuss with you. Ethan stared at the message, trying to decode it. Actual work. A proposal. His brain immediately went to worst-case scenarios. She was transferring him to a different department, creating distance, protecting them both from the complications they'd invited into their lives. At 9:58, he stood outside her office, straightening his tie and trying to calm his racing heart. Her assistant waved him in without looking up from her computer, and Ethan stepped into the large corner office he'd only been in a handful of times in 3 years. Lydia stood at her window, looking out over the city, her posture rigid with the kind of tension that came from carrying too much weight for too long. She turned when she heard him enter, and the expression on her face was unreadable. "Close the door," she said quietly. He did, and they stood facing each other across her enormous desk, the physical manifestation of the professional distance that should exist between them but didn't anymore. "I couldn't sleep last night," Lydia said without preamble. "I kept thinking about what you said, about falling, about the future, about building something real from an impossible beginning." "Lydia, let me finish." She moved away from the window, but instead of sitting behind her desk, maintaining the power dynamic, the professional separation, she came around to lean against it, closer to him. "I've spent my entire adult life building this company, 16-hour days, sacrificing relationships, health, any semblance of work-life balance. I told myself it was worth it, that success would fill the empty spaces, that achievement would be enough. And now? Now I realize I've been building a prison disguised as an empire." She met his eyes. "Watching you with Maisie showed me what I've been missing. Not just family or connection, but purpose beyond profit, meaning beyond metrics. A life that matters in ways that quarterly reports never will." Ethan's throat tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this company has consumed me for too long, that I've let it define me to the exclusion of everything else. And I'm tired, Ethan. I'm so tired of being the CEO who has everything except the things that actually matter." "You're not quitting," Ethan said, hearing the edge of panic in his own voice. "Please tell me you're not quitting because of us, because that would destroy any chance we have at making this work." "I'm not quitting." Lydia's smile was small but genuine. "But I am changing everything, starting with how this company operates. She walked to her desk and pulled out a folder, handing it to Ethan. Inside were printed documents, policy proposals, organizational charts, detailed plans for restructuring that looked like they'd taken weeks to develop. I started working on this Saturday night, Lydia explained, after I left your house, after our conversation. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about building a life where work and family could coexist, where success didn't require sacrifice of everything else. Ethan scanned the documents, his eyes widening as he processed what he was reading. Flexible work schedules, expanded family leave, remote work options, childcare subsidies, mental health support, a complete overhaul of the company culture from the ground up. He looked up at her. This is massive. This will cost millions. The board will never approve it. The board doesn't have a choice. I control 51% of voting shares, and I'm using that power to build the kind of company I wish had existed when I was starting out. The kind of company where people like you don't have to choose between career advancement and being present for their children. Lydia, this is incredible, but you can't do this because of me, because of us. I'm not doing this because of you, she interrupted. I'm doing this because of me. Because spending a weekend in your home made me realize that the way I've been running this company reflects the emptiness in my own life. I built a culture of constant availability because I had nothing to go home to. I demanded sacrifice because that's all I knew how to give. She paused. But you showed me there's another way, that leadership doesn't have to mean martyrdom, that success can include balance. Ethan set the folder down carefully. When are you announcing this? This afternoon. Company-wide meeting at 3. I'm going to present the new policies, explain the reasoning, and make it clear that Shaw Industries is moving in a new direction. She took a breath. And I'm going to tell them that the inspiration came from watching one of our employees excel at both his job and his role as a father, and realizing our company should support that instead of making it harder. You're going to mention me? Not by name, but yes. I'm going to acknowledge that seeing someone successfully balance work and family made me question whether our culture was helping or hindering that balance. She moved closer. Is that okay? I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position. It's more than okay. Ethan struggled to find words. It's the most meaningful thing anyone's ever done for me. For Maisie. For everyone here who's been struggling in silence. Good. Because I need your help making it work. Lydia pulled out another document, this one with his name at the top. I want to create a new position, Director of Employee Experience and Wellness. Someone who can oversee the implementation of these policies, serve as an advocate for work-life balance, help reshape our culture from the inside. Ethan stared at the job description, his brain struggling to process what she was offering. You want me to take this role? You're the most qualified person I know. You've been navigating these challenges for 3 years. You understand what employees need because you've lived it. And, she smiled, you're not afraid to tell me when I'm wrong, which is exactly what this role requires. This is a huge promotion. People will talk. They'll say you're showing favoritism because of our relationship. Let them talk. I'm prepared to defend this decision on its merits, which are substantial. You've consistently exceeded expectations in your current role. You have the trust of your colleagues, and you have first-hand experience with the exact issues we're trying to address. She met his eyes. The fact that I also happen to be falling in love with you is irrelevant to your qualifications. The words hung in the air between them, and Ethan felt his heart stop and restart in the space of a single breath. Say that again, he whispered. Which part? The falling in love part. Lydia's expression softened, vulnerability and certainty mixing in her eyes. I'm falling in love with you, Ethan Parker. With your patience and your kindness and the way you've built a beautiful life from broken pieces. With your terrible tie collection and your pancake skills and the way you look at your daughter like she's the most important thing in the universe. She stepped closer. I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me, but I don't want to stop. Ethan closed the distance between them, framing her face with his hands. I'm falling in love with you too, with your strength and your vulnerability and the way you've let yourself be transformed by a 6-year-old with a stuffed rabbit, with your determination to do better and your willingness to admit when you've been wrong, with everything you are and everything you're becoming. He kissed her then, there in her office where anyone could walk in, where cameras might record them, where the professional world they inhabited could collide catastrophically with the personal one they were building. He kissed her and didn't care about the consequences because some things were worth the risk. When they broke apart, Lydia was crying again, but smiling through the tears in that way he was learning meant she was feeling too much to contain. "I should probably accept that job offer before I kiss you again," Ethan said, his forehead resting against hers. "Probably wise." She pulled back slightly, professional composure reasserting itself even as her eyes remained soft. "Though I should mention there's one condition." "What's that?" "You have to help me tell Maisie about us, about what we're becoming, because I refuse to be the adult in her life who keeps secrets or isn't honest about important things. She asked me last night if you were going to be her new mommy." Lydia's breath caught. "What did you tell her?" "That you're Lydia, that you care about us very much, that you want to be part of our lives, but that you're not replacing anyone." He paused. She seemed satisfied with that. "Said you could just be Lydia who loves us and makes pancakes and does funny voices." I can work with that." Lydia's smile was tremulous, "though I should probably practice my dragon voice more if I'm going to meet her standards." They stood there, holding each other in the quiet of her office, and Ethan felt the future clicking into place like puzzle pieces he hadn't known were missing. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you go back to your desk and pretend this conversation was purely professional. At 3 o'clock, you attend the company meeting and act appropriately surprised by the announcements. Tomorrow, you accept the promotion and start transitioning into your new role." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "And tonight, if you're willing, I come over for dinner and we tell Maisie together that we're becoming something more than friends. She's going to lose her mind with joy." "I hope so, because I'm already halfway in love with her too." Ethan kissed her forehead and stepped back, rebuilding professional distance, even as everything between them had fundamentally shifted. "I'll see you at 3. "See you then." He left her office and made it back to his desk without anyone stopping him, without anyone seeming to notice that his entire world had just reorganized itself around a conversation about policy changes and promotions and falling in love with his boss. The rest of the morning passed in a haze. Ethan tried to work, tried to focus, tried to act normal while his brain processed job offers and policy changes, and the reality that Lydia Shaw had just told him she was falling in love with him. Jason stopped by his desk at lunch. "You okay? You've been staring at that spreadsheet for 20 minutes without typing anything." "Yeah, just thinking about some stuff." "Must be serious stuff. You look like you're solving world peace or having a crisis. Maybe both." "Maybe both," Ethan agreed, and Jason laughed like it was a joke. At 2:50, the entire company gathered in the main conference room for the emergency meeting Lydia had called that morning. People speculated in hushed whispers, layoffs, acquisition, some kind of major announcement that would change everything. They weren't wrong. Lydia entered at exactly 3 o'clock, commanding the room with her presence in that way she had, and Ethan watched from his spot in the back as she transformed from the vulnerable woman who'd cried in his arms to the CEO who could reshape a company with pure force of will. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice carrying easily across the packed room. "I know emergency meetings are usually associated with bad news, so let me start by saying this is not that. This is about evolution, about growth, about building the kind of company we all deserve to work for." She clicked to the first slide of her presentation, and Ethan watched the room's collective reaction as she unveiled the new policies. Shock, disbelief, growing excitement as people processed what she was offering. "I know this seems sudden," Lydia continued, "and I'll be honest with you about why. Recently, I had the opportunity to witness firsthand how our current culture fails the people who work here. I watched someone I respect deeply navigate the impossible choice between being an excellent employee and being a present parent, and I realized that we've built a company that demands sacrifice but offers no support for the lives people are actually living." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. Ethan knew when she found him, felt the weight of her gaze even across the distance. So I asked myself, what kind of company do I want to lead? One that measures success by hours logged and emails answered, or one that measures it by the whole lives we enable our employees to live? She clicked to the next slide. I choose the second option. Starting immediately, we're implementing these changes. And I'm creating a new position, Director of Employee Experience and Wellness, to ensure these aren't just policies on paper, but real, meaningful support for the people who make this company run. The announcement went on for another 30 minutes, Lydia fielding questions with her characteristic precision, while also showing a warmth and openness that Ethan had never seen her display professionally. This was a new version of her, still commanding, still brilliant, but also accessible, human, real in ways that the Ice Queen CEO had never allowed herself to be. When the meeting ended, people flooded out buzzing with excitement and speculation. Ethan hung back, watching Lydia pack up her presentation materials, seeing the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders now that the performance was over. She looked up and found him watching, and her smile was tired but genuine. He nodded once, acknowledgement, support, pride in what she'd just done. And she nodded back before being swept up by executives wanting to discuss implementation timelines. Ethan left the building and drove to pick up Maisie from after-school care, his mind still processing everything that had happened in the span of 8 hours. A job offer, a declaration of love, a complete restructuring of company culture, a future that looked nothing like what he'd imagined and everything he hadn't known to hope for. Maisie bounded out of the building with her usual enthusiasm, already talking before her seatbelt was even fastened. "Guess what, Daddy? I learned about fractions today, and they're way easier than everyone says. And also, Timothy Morrison fell off the monkey bars, but he's fine. And can we have tacos for dinner?" Actually, Lydia's coming over for dinner tonight. Maisie's shriek of joy was so loud, Ethan worried about permanent hearing damage. Really, 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 really. And we need to talk to you about something important." His daughter's face immediately scrunched with worry. "Is she leaving? Please don't say she's leaving, because I said she could just be Lydia, but I changed my mind and I want her to stay forever and—" "She's not leaving, baby. I promise. This is good news. But it's important news, and we want to talk to you about it together." Maisie processed this, her expression cycling through worry, hope, and cautious excitement. "Okay, but can we still have tacos?" "We can still have tacos." They stopped at the grocery store, Maisie maintaining a running commentary on taco construction, while Ethan tried to figure out how exactly you told a 6-year-old that you were falling in love with someone who'd only been in their lives for 2 weeks. Lydia arrived at 6:30, still in her work clothes, but with that same softness in her expression that appeared when she crossed the threshold into their home. Maisie launched herself with predictable enthusiasm, and Ethan watched them hug like they'd been separated for months instead of hours. They made tacos together, the three of them moving around the kitchen in a dance that was starting to feel choreographed. Maisie dominated the conversation as usual, telling Lydia about fractions and Timothy Morrison's monkey bar incident with dramatic flourishes. After dinner, Ethan caught Lydia's eye and nodded toward the living room. They settled on the couch, Maisie between them, and his daughter immediately picked up on the seriousness of the moment. "Okay, what's the important thing?" she asked, looking between them with wide eyes. Ethan took a breath, then decided honesty was the only approach that made sense. "Lydia and I have become very close friends over the past couple weeks." "I know. That's because she's awesome." "She is awesome," Ethan agreed, "and spending time with her has made me really happy. Happier than I've been in a long time." "Me too." Maisie bounced slightly. "She makes everything more fun." Lydia reached out and took Maisie's hand. "You make everything more fun too, both of you. Being here, with you, has shown me what my life was missing, and I don't want to go back to not having this." "So you're staying?" Maisie's voice was small, hopeful, fragile with the weight of wanting something too much. "I'm staying, as much as you and your dad want me to. Because," Lydia glanced at Ethan, who nodded encouragement, "because I've fallen in love with both of you, with your dad's kindness and your joy and the beautiful life you've built together, and I want to be part of it, if you'll let me." Maisie looked at Ethan. "You love her too?" "I do, very much." "And she loves you?" "She does." Maisie's face cycled through several emotions too quickly to track, then landed on something that looked like cautious hope. "So you're going to be together, like boyfriend and girlfriend?" "Something like that," Ethan said carefully. "We're going to spend more time together, see each other more often, Figure out how to build a life that includes all three of us. But she's not going to be my new mommy. It wasn't a question, but Lydia answered it anyway. I'm not trying to replace your mom. I could never replace her. But I'm hoping to be someone important in your life. Someone who loves you and shows up for you and is here when you need me. Like an extra grown-up who's on my team? Exactly like that. Maisie considered this with the seriousness she brought to all major decisions. Then she threw her arms around Lydia's neck and whispered, I'm really glad you found Mr. Hopscotch. Lydia's laugh was half sob. She hugged Maisie back, then reached out to pull Ethan into the embrace, and they sat there on the couch, all three of them tangled together, while something new and fragile and potentially permanent took shape around them. The weeks that followed were a study in controlled chaos. Ethan started his new position, navigating the strange reality of reporting directly to Lydia while also dating her. They maintained strict professional boundaries at work, but everyone seemed to notice anyway. The way their eyes found each other in meetings, the careful way they didn't sit too close, the energy that hummed between them even when they were trying to hide it. Jason cornered Ethan in the break room 3 weeks into the new arrangement. Okay, I have a theory. About what? About you and Shaw. About why she suddenly got interested in work-life balance right around the time you started smiling randomly and checking your phone constantly. Ethan kept his expression neutral. I have no idea what you're talking about. Sure you don't. And I'm sure it's pure coincidence that she created a position perfectly suited to your skills right after you mentioned you'd met someone who was great with Maisie. Are you asking me something or just wildly speculating? Jason grinned. I'm saying that if you were hypothetically dating our CEO, I'd be happy for you, and also terrified for you, but mostly happy. Hypothetically? Hypothetically. Ethan took a sip of his coffee, then made a decision. Hypothetically, if I were dating someone in a position of power over my career, we'd have very clear boundaries to prevent any conflicts of interest or perceptions of favoritism. Hypothetically. Hypothetically, that sounds very mature and professional. Jason's grin widened. Also hypothetically, good for you, man. You deserve to be happy. The conversation became moot 2 weeks later when Lydia announced she was stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on long-term strategy, appointing a COO to handle the administrative details she'd been micromanaging for years. It was presented as a business decision about growth and delegation, but Ethan knew the truth. She was creating space in her life for things that mattered more than quarterly reports. They navigated the complexities of blending their worlds with varying degrees of success. Some nights, Lydia came for dinner and stayed through bedtime, reading stories and helping with homework, and slowly becoming a fixture in Maisie's life. Other nights, work emergencies kept her away, and Ethan watched his daughter's disappointment and worried about building expectations they couldn't always meet. But Lydia always called when she couldn't make it, always explained, always made it up with weekend adventures or surprise visits. She was learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to balance the demands of her position with the promises she'd made to a 6-year-old and the relationship she was building with Ethan. 3 months after that first knock on his door, Ethan woke up on a Saturday morning to find Lydia already in his kitchen, making pancakes with Maisie. They were laughing about something, chocolate chips scattered across the counter, and the whole scene was so perfectly domestic that Ethan had to stop in the doorway and just watch. Daddy's awake, Maisie announced. Maisie, and Lydia's teaching me the secret to perfect pancake flipping, which is apparently all in the wrist. It's absolutely all in the wrist, Lydia confirmed, demonstrating with the kind of intense focus she probably used to bring to board meetings. Though I've been practicing. Your dad's been coaching me. He's a good coach. He taught me to ride my bike without training wheels. Then I'm in excellent hands. They ate breakfast together, the three of them, and Ethan marveled at how normal this had become, how Lydia's toothbrush had appeared in his bathroom without discussion, how she knew where they kept the good syrup and which plates Maisie considered lucky, how she'd integrated into their lives so completely that he couldn't quite remember what weekends had looked like before her. After breakfast, Maisie went to her room to work on an art project, and Ethan and Lydia cleaned up together in comfortable silence. I've been thinking, Lydia said, drying the last plate. That sounds dangerous. She smiled, nudging him with her elbow. I've been thinking about what comes next. For us. For this. Ethan's hand stilled in the soapy water. What do you mean? I mean that I've been coming over 3 or 4 nights a week for months now, that I have a drawer in your dresser and a toothbrush in your bathroom, and Maisie introduces me to her friends as her extra grown-up who's on her team. Lydia set down the dish towel and turned to face him. And I don't want to rush this or push for something you're not ready for, but I also don't want to keep pretending I have a life outside of this one. What are you saying? I'm saying my apartment feels like a hotel I'm visiting between stays in the place I actually live. I'm saying I spend more nights here than there. I'm saying, she took a breath. I'm saying that if you wanted me to move in, officially, I would like that very much. Ethan's heart stopped. Started. Raced ahead of his brain to a future where this was permanent, where Lydia didn't leave at the end of the night, where Maisie woke up every morning to both of them instead of just him. That's a big step, he said carefully. I know. And if it's too soon, I understand. We can keep doing what we're doing. Take our time. Wait until... I want that, Ethan interrupted. I want you here. Permanently. Officially. Wake up next to you every morning, kind of here. Lydia's expression transformed, hope and joy and relief mixing together. Really? Really? But we need to talk to Maisie first. Make sure she's okay with such a big change. Of course. They found Maisie in her room, surrounded by construction paper and markers, working on what appeared to be an elaborate family tree project. Hey, baby, can we talk to you about something? Ethan asked, settling on the floor beside her. Is it important? Very important. Maisie set down her markers with exaggerated seriousness. Okay, I'm ready for important. Lydia sat on Maisie's other side. How would you feel if I moved in here? If instead of visiting a few nights a week, I lived here all the time? Maisie's eyes went wide. Like, for real? Not just visiting, but actually living here? For real, Lydia confirmed. If that's okay with you. Would you have your own room or share with Daddy? The question was so practical, so matter-of-fact, that Ethan almost laughed. She'd share with me. And would you still go to work during the day? Yes, Lydia said. But I'd come home every night, to here, to you, and your dad. Maisie thought about this, her face scrunched in concentration. Then she looked at her family tree project, at the careful way she'd drawn figures and connected them with lines. I was working on this for school, she explained. We're supposed to draw our families, and I didn't know how to draw you because you're not my mom, but you're not just a friend either. Mrs. Rodriguez said I could draw whoever felt like family. She pointed to a figure she'd added in purple marker. So I drew you. Right here. Part of us. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. I would be honored to be part of your family, in whatever way makes sense to you. Then yes, Maisie said with the decisive certainty she brought to all major decisions. You should definitely move in, but you have to promise to keep making pancakes and doing voices and being here when I need you. I promise. And you have to promise not to leave like my real mom did. The words hung in the air, and Ethan saw Lydia's expression crack with understanding of what she was really being asked, not just to move in, not just to be present, but to stay, to commit, to choose them again and again and again. I promise, Lydia said, her voice thick with emotion. I promise to stay and show up and be here even when it's hard or boring or inconvenient, because you matter more than anything else, both of you. Maisie studied her for a long moment, then nodded and went back to her family tree, casually adding details to the purple figure like they'd just decided what to have for lunch, instead of reshaping their entire family structure. Ethan and Lydia exchanged glances over his daughter's head, and in that moment, he saw their future stretching out ahead, messy and complicated and absolutely worth every risk they'd taken to get here. The transition happened gradually over the next month. Lydia moved her things in stages, integrating her life with theirs, until the distinction between visiting and living disappeared entirely. The expensive apartment was sold. The carefully curated furniture was donated or stored. And slowly, carefully, Lydia Shaw built a home in the small, imperfect house that Ethan and Maisie had been maintaining alone. 6 months after that first knock on the door, Ethan stood in his kitchen, their kitchen now, watching Lydia help Maisie with homework at the table. They were arguing good-naturedly about whether fractions or decimals were more useful in real life, and Maisie was holding her ground with the stubborn determination she'd inherited from him. His phone buzzed with a message from Jason. "Company, happy hour tonight. You guys coming?" Ethan looked at the scene in front of him, his daughter and his girlfriend debating math, Mr. Hopscotch sitting on the table as an impartial observer, dinner simmering on the stove, and made his choice. "Can't make it. Family dinner night. You've gone soft, Parker." "Yeah, I really have." He set down his phone and joined them at the table, inserting himself into the fraction debate with an opinion that made both of them turn on him in unified outrage. And as they argued and laughed and eventually abandoned homework in favor of setting the table for dinner, Ethan felt the weight of the past 6 months settle into something that felt like permanence. They'd started with a knock at the door and a stuffed rabbit. They'd built something from impossible odds and crossed boundaries and careful risks. And now, standing in a kitchen that smelled like home, surrounded by the people who'd chosen him just as deliberately as he'd chosen them, Ethan understood what Lydia had been searching for all along. Not success, not achievement, not the kind of perfection that came from ruthlessly eliminating anything that didn't serve a purpose. But this, the messy, imperfect, absolutely irreplaceable experience of being loved and choosing to love back, of building a life that mattered in ways quarterly reports never could, of finding family in unexpected places, and having the courage to claim it. Later that night, after Maisie was asleep and they were cleaning up the dinner dishes, Lydia came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For opening your door that Saturday morning, for letting me in, for showing me what I'd been missing." She tightened her hold. "For building this with me." Ethan turned in her arms to face her. "You found Mr. Hopscotch. You showed up. You did the scary thing and kept showing up even when it was hard." "We both did the scary thing." "Yeah, we did." They stood there in the quiet kitchen, holding each other, and Ethan thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, careful, guarded, convinced that protecting himself and Maisie meant keeping the world at arm's length. That man would never have believed this was possible, would never have risked letting someone in who had the power to shatter everything he'd built. But that man hadn't met Lydia Shaw at her most vulnerable, hadn't seen her wear a plastic tiara or cry over bedtime stories or transform an entire company culture because she'd glimpsed a different way of living. Hadn't experienced the particular kind of love that came from watching someone choose growth over comfort, connection over achievement, messy reality over perfect isolation. "I love you," Ethan said, the words still new enough to feel significant every time he said them. "I love you too." Lydia pulled back to meet his eyes. "Both of you, this whole imperfect, wonderful life we're building." "It is pretty wonderful, isn't it? The most wonderful. Even when it's hard, maybe especially when it's hard." They finished the dishes and headed to bed, walking past Maisie's room where their daughter slept with Mr. Hopscotch tucked under her chin, blissfully unaware that a lost toy had led to found family. And as Ethan settled into bed beside Lydia, his girlfriend, his partner, the woman who'd knocked on his door and changed everything, he sent up a silent thank you to whatever twist of fate had brought them to this moment. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Work would still be complicated. Navigating their relationship in professional spaces would still require careful balance. The world would still have opinions about a CEO dating her employee, even with all the boundaries they'd constructed to protect against conflicts of interest. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, none of that mattered. What mattered was the warmth of Lydia beside him, the sound of Maisie's soft breathing down the hall, the undeniable rightness of choosing love over fear. They'd started with a knock at the door. They'd built something real from an impossible beginning, and now, finally, they were home. Not in a physical place, though this house had become that too, but in each other. In the family they'd chosen to become. In the messy, imperfect, absolutely irreplaceable life they were building together, one ordinary moment at a time. And that, Ethan thought as sleep began to claim him, was worth every risk they'd taken, every boundary they'd carefully navigated, every moment of uncertainty and fear. Because on the other side of fear was this: connection, love, family, home, all the things that mattered, All the things worth fighting for, all the things that had been waiting, patient, and possible, just on the other side of a closed door he'd finally found the courage to open.